Good evening, people of the internet. Welcome to my stream Dorkly Lit, where we are having a read-along of the Dungeon Master's Guide to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. We're currently at part 3, chapter 8. Is it chapter 8? Let me just take a peek. Yeah, chapter 8. And part 3 is Master of the Rules. I'm not sure what it means, but I can only assume that it means they're gonna teach us all the rules essential to being a DM that didn't make it into the player's guide because you don't really need them as a player. And the chapter 8 is running the game. So we're gonna learn how to run the game, I assume. Without further ado, rules enable you and your players to have fun at the table. The rules serve you, not vice versa. There are the rules of the game, and there are table rules for how the game is played. For instance, players need to know what happens when one of them misses a session. They need to know whether to bring miniatures, any special rules you've decided to use, and how to treat a cocked die. A die that lands so that its face can't be clearly read. These topics and more are covered in this chapter. Aren't you being a little bit too, how to say it, persnickety? With actually telling DMs about how to run the table. I mean, it's fine if you don't have rules for whether to bring minis or no, or how to treat a die that's cocked. I mean, it makes things easier if you do, but if you want to keep it light, I can't imagine myself inviting some players to a game and then telling them there's some ground rules you need to know. Whenever a die lands cocked, you need to reroll. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, you have to bring around that sort of thing. I put it in a book, come on. Just, come on. Table rules. Ideally, players come to the game with the same goal to have a fun time together. This section gives recommendations for the table rules you can establish to help meet that goal. Here are some fundamentals. Foster respect. Don't bring personal conflict to the table or let disagreements escalate into bad feelings. Don't touch others' dice if they're sensitive about it. I assume that the second one is a joke. Avoid distractions. Turn off the television and video games. If you have young children, hire a babysitter. Reducing distractions helps players stay in character and enjoy the story. It might be fine to have players wandering away from the table and back, but some players prefer planned breaks. Have snacks. Decide before a session who will bring food and drink. This is often something the players can handle. Alright, so for me, you don't really have to foster that much respect. I assume you're all friends, or you intend to be friends at the end of the day when the game is over. You should be natural. If you don't like someone, you don't have to like them. That's fine, that's okay. You don't even have to be nice to them. Just don't surround yourself with toxic people in general. Avoid distractions. This one is actually a big deal for me, because a lot of people can treat a tabletop game very casually. Be like, it's just for fun, so I can be on my phone. It's just for fun, so I can just walk away if I don't want to keep playing. Or the bit where it says it might be fine to have players wandering away from the table and park. I can't imagine that. That is so disrespectful. Can't you spare 5 minutes? What's wrong with you? And when it comes to story moments and other players are, for example, doing shopping, maybe ask if you really need to be somewhere else. But you should be open to listening to other people. Tabletop role-playing games are the sort of game that you're never gonna have 100% time for you. And you should learn to enjoy the stories of other people at the table, of your co-players. You should be having as much fun listening to their stories, or maybe not as much, but at least approaching amounts of fun when listening to the parts of the story that belong to other players as you are when having your own spotlight bits. Decide before a session who will bring food and drink. This is often something the players can handle. I don't like necessarily when people eat at the table, because you can't really roleplay when you're stuffing your face, but it's fine. D&D is much more about combat and rules than the games I'm used to. More so than anything, you should be on the same page with your players, and that's gonna help your group stay together, because it's an important thing about these games that some groups just fall apart, implode, because certain players are maybe wanted something different from the game, or they weren't really into tabletop games to begin with, and they only learn it midway through the campaign and they want to quit. Better just talk about it. In one of my past streams, something called a Session Zero came up in my talk between me and my listeners, and what a Session Zero is basically players talking about their expectations for the game, what they want from it, what they expect from it, what they can and cannot have at the table. It's very important if you play with people who aren't your fast friends. back in the day when I used to DM, I had the privilege of playing mostly with my friends and DMing only for my fast friends and family. And we didn't have to have a session 0, but if, or rather when, I'm going to run a game for complete strangers that I meet on the internet, I'm definitely going to have a session 0, and I strongly advise you to have a session 0 before your games. And another thing is, a lot of people have anxiety issues about talking in public or to people who they don't know. On the internet too, it happens a lot. Some people are just anxious when they have to make a phone call and order pizza, and I can perfectly understand that. And these people can, and sometimes do, open themselves up during a game, but you have to kind of sort of go through it, ideally before a game. If you're going to play with a stranger on Discord, maybe make sure that you get to talk. It's not through writing, but actually talk, that you can hear them talk. It's gonna be better for you, and it's gonna be better for them, because they're gonna have a less stressful environment to actually speak to you, complete stranger, and they're not gonna flake out on you later because they're so petrified that they feel like they have to bail. Anyway, dice rolling. Let's get to dice rolling. Establish expectations about rolling dice. Rolling in full view of everyone is a good starting point. If you see a player rolling and scooping the dice up before anyone else can see, encourage that player to be less secretive. When a die falls on the floor, do you count it or re-roll it? When it lands cocked against a book, do you pull the book away and see where it lands or re-roll it? What about you, the DM? Do you make your rolls in the open or hide them behind the DM screen? Consider the following. If you roll dice where the players can see, they know you're playing impartially and not fudging rolls. Rolling behind the screen keeps the players guessing about the strength of their opposition. When a monster hits all the time, is it of a much higher level than the characters, or are you rolling high numbers? Rolling behind the screen lets you fudge the results if you want to. If 2 critical hits in a row would kill a character, you could change the second critical hit into a normal hit, or even a miss. Don't distort die rolls too often though, and don't let on that you're doing it. Otherwise your players might think they don't face any real risks, or worse, that you're playing favorites. A roll behind the screen can help preserve mystery. For example, if a player thinks there might be someone invisible nearby and makes a wisdom perception check, consider rolling a die behind the screen, even if no one is there, making the player think someone is indeed hiding. Try not to overuse this trick. No, do overuse this trick, actually. If someone's making a wisdom perception roll, or rather, if the player thinks that someone's making a perception roll nearby to see them, you have to roll. If there is any reason for you to roll, if something was true that isn't, do it, you have to roll it. For example, if a player thought that the monster is holding a door back on the other side of the door, and they were trying to open it, and they draw for the strength check, even if there is no monster on the other side, if the player thinks there might be a monster on the other side, you have to roll it, because if you don't roll, they're gonna know. I don't see why they're saying try not to overuse this trick. I always roll to keep the pretense that something is not like the players think. Alright, I'm gonna address a bigger thing. Whenever a player gets the wrong idea, whenever a player misinterprets something that happens in a way where this misinterpretation is not because you spoke too quietly or they weren't at the table at the moment or something. If they misinterpret something that the character did here and they did here, and it is reasonable that the character within the game could misinterpret, just run with it. Keep up the facade. The games are much more fun when players assume things that are untrue, when players get bamboozled by accident, when you do not dispel their false assumptions. You're the DM, and as a DM you should be rejoicing at the thought of that, because you want some extra dynamics in your game, some extra chaos, some extra drama, and that way the players are making it for you. If you can do it with a die roll, by all means try to do it. And if you can do it by just not saying too much, do it. Whatever the means to do it, do it. It's good. It's always good. I remember when I started my first campaign in Dungeons and Dragons, and we met an NPC who was behind the lines in a cult, right? There were a spy in this cult, a mole, a plant in this cult. He was on the side of the good guys. And then we spoke to this NPC when he got caught by the cult guys. We rescued him and we talked to him. And he told us that one of the prominent leaders of the cult looked at him and knew his name and called out his name. And I assumed that this particular cult leader possessed some magical power to tell a person's name from looking at them, or something of that sort. I misinterpreted the situation as such, right? And my character was basically acting under that assumption. I was talking to the players under that assumption. And the DM told me, no, that's not the case. He did it normal, like without any magic powers. Even though my character had no way of knowing it, and I had, as a player, no way of knowing it, he corrected my mistake. That would have been a very in-character mistake. And I was so disappointed at that point in the game. I was so disappointed that he told me. Why would you tell me? The whole thing would have been so much more fun if I didn't know. And you should be careful with these sort of things. Don't tell them too much. And if they make a mistake, well, it's a fine line. You might want to encourage it even. But don't make it cheating. As long as you're not making it quote unquote cheating, do your best. Do your best to create mischief. Anyway, that was a long digression for nothing, essentially, but you might choose to make a roll for a player because you don't want the player to know how good the check total is. For example, if a player suspects the Baroness might be charmed and wants to make a Wisdom insight check, you could take the roll in secret for the player. If the player rolled and got a high number, but didn't sense anything amiss, the player would be confident that the Baroness wasn't charmed. With a low roll, a negative answer wouldn't mean much. A hidden roll allows uncertainty. This one is pretty good, but for D&D specifically, I probably wouldn't do it, because D&D has abilities that let you displace a roll, for example, if you're a diviner, or use luck to roll better when you have the luck feat. And I feel like D&D is much more about rules than it is about this sort of trickery. While I would do it in many other games, in Fate Forge Edition I might do a secret roll for this sort of thing, or in Warhammer I might have done a secret roll for this sort of thing. I probably wouldn't in D&D, just because I feel like D&D has gravity placed on different things. When I'm playing D&D, I want to be rolling my own rolls, and I want to get lucky, and I want to have a little bit of rules and a little bit of power gaming. Just a little bit, maybe not too much, but a little bit. Rolling attacks and damage. Players are accustomed to rolling an attack roll first and then a damage roll. If players make attack rolls and damage rolls at the same time, the action moves a little faster around the table. Rules discussions. You might need to set a policy on rules discussions at the table. Some groups don't mind putting the game on hold while they hash out different interpretations of a rule. Others prefer to let the DM make a call and continue with the action. If you gloss over a rules issue in play, make a note of it. A good task to delegate to a player, and return to the issue later. Metagame thinking. Metagame thinking means thinking about the game as a game. It's like when a character in the movie knows it's a movie and acts accordingly. For example, a player might say the DM wouldn't throw such a powerful monster at us, or you might hear the read aloud text spent a lot of time describing that door. Let's search it again. Discourage metagame thinking by giving players a gentle reminder what your characters think. You can curb metagame thinking by setting up situations that will be difficult for the characters and that might require negotiation or retreat to survive. Just don't play with metagamers. It's great because as a DM you get to pick your players. If you don't want to play as someone, just tell them, I'm sorry dude, it's too much metagaming for my taste and I feel like you don't mesh too well with the rest of the group on that. You can be gentle and nice and courteous about it. I just don't want to play with metagamers, and as a DM I would just ask them, no, please, don't. And if it doesn't help, I'd just kick them. Missing players. How should you deal with the characters of missing players? Consider these options. Have another player run the missing player's character. The player running the extra character could strive to keep the character alive and use resources wisely. I would never do that. Run the character yourself. It's an extra burden for you, but it can work. Decide the character isn't there. Invent a good reason for the character to miss the adventure, perhaps by having him or her linger in town or continue a downtown activity. Leave a way for the character to rejoin the party when the player returns. Have the player fade into the background. This solution requires everyone to step out of the game world a bit and suspend disbelief, but might be the easiest solution. You act as if the character is not there, but don't try to come up with any in-game explanation for this absence. Monsters don't attack the character, who returns to favor. On returning, the player resumes playing as if he or she was never gone. That's a tough one, because it does happen sometimes. If I was playing with friends, I would probably have the game not happen, because I'd want all the players to have narrative continuity, and if I really had to. Oh, for example, if I was running a stream and one of my players couldn't make it, but I'd still want the stream to happen, and all of my players wanted the stream to happen because, I don't know, they're streaming too. They have a commitment to someone, to their watchers, whatever reason. If it was just my stream, I'd probably just let it go. But if I was running a stream and we were missing a single character, I'd probably try to invent a good in-game reason why they're not there. And if I could, I'd run with that, but still, I might consider letting the game not happen. This is a tough one. If you DM long enough, sooner or later, this is gonna happen to you. Small groups. Most of the time, each player runs one character. The game plays best that way without overwhelming anyone. But if your group is small, players can control more than one character, or you can fill the group with NPC followers using the guidelines in Chapter 4, creating non-player characters. You can also make the characters more resilient by using the Healing Surge option in Chapter 9. Dungeon Master's Workshop. Okay, we haven't read about that one. Don't force a reluctant player to take on multiple characters, and don't show favoritism by allowing only one player to do so. That's favoritism to you? What is wrong with you? I mean, no, like this entire thing with filling a party with NPCs and having players control them for mechanical reasons, that's ridiculous to me. Absolutely not. Not at my table. Don't force a reluctant player to take on multiple characters, and don't show favoritism by allowing only one player to do so. If one character is the mentor of the other, the player can focus on role-playing just one character. Otherwise, players can end up awkwardly talking to themselves in character or avoiding role-playing altogether. Multiple characters can be a good idea in games that features non-stop peril and high rate of character death. If your group agrees to the premise, have each player keep 1 or 2 additional characters on hand, ready to jump in whenever the current character dies. Each time the main character gains a level, the backup characters do as well. No, don't do it. I feel like a lot of D&D players like stuff that wargamers like, much more so than role-playing games players from other systems. And a lot of D&D is quite closely related to wargaming, much more so than, for example, Fate. New players. When a new player joins the group, allow the new player to create a character of a level equal to lowest level member of the party. The only exception to this guideline is when the new player is completely unfamiliar with the D&D game. In that case, have the player start with the first level character. If the rest of the party is significantly higher in level, consider taking a short break from the campaign and having everyone play a first level character for a few sessions while the newer player learns the ropes. Integrating a new player into the group can be difficult if the party is in the middle of an adventure. The following approaches can help make it easier. The new character is a friend or relative of one of the adventurers who has been searching for the group. The new character is a prisoner of the foes the other characters are fighting. When rescued, this character joins the group. The new character is the sole survivor of another adventuring group. The roll of the dice. I have no comments on new players because I haven't had that happen to me ever, where I had to integrate a new player into the group. Dice are neutral arbiters. They can determine the outcome of an action without assigning any motivation to the DM and without playing favorites. The extent to which you use them is entirely up to you. Why would they put that in? Is it like a disclaimer before something they're about to write? Rolling with it. Some DMs rely on die rolls for almost everything. When a character attempts a task, the DM calls for a check and picks a DC. As a DM using this style, you can't rely on the character succeeding or failing on any one check to move the action in a specific direction. You must be ready to improvise and react to changing situations. Rely on the dice also gives the players the sense that anything is possible. Sure, it might seem unlikely that the party's halfling can leap on the ogre's back, pull a sack over its head and then dive to safety. But with a lucky enough roll, it just might work. A drawback of this approach is that role-playing can diminish if players feel that their die rolls, rather than their decisions and characterizations, always determine the success. Alright, so one thing that I feel is very important when a player attempts something that a normal person would normally be able to do, don't make them roll for it. A lot of novice DMs do it. They make the player roll for it, just I don't know why, honestly. Because maybe they think that you need some aspect of challenge to the game, and if you don't have X rolls per minute, or rather X rolls per 10 minutes, it's not a game. No, that's fine. If no player does anything that requires them to tackle some difficulty, don't roll, it's fine. You don't have to roll. It's not that kind of game. Ignoring the dice. One approach is to use dice as rarely as possible. So, okay, so they might say what I just said. One approach is to use dice as rarely as possible. Some DMs use them only during combat and determine success or failure as they like in other situations. With this approach, the DM decides whether an action or a plan succeeds or fails based on how well the players make their case, how thorough or creative they are, or other factors. For example, the players might describe how they search for a secret door, detailing how they tap on a wall or twist a torch sconce to find its trigger. That could be enough to convince the DM that they find the secret door without having to make an ability check to do so. I have a good example in just a second. Okay, I'm just going to read this till the end and then I'm going to give you the example. This approach rewards creativity by encouraging players to look to the situation you've described for an answer rather than looking to the character's sheet or the character's special abilities. A downside is that no DM is completely neutral. A DM might come to favor certain players or approaches, or even work against good ideas if they spend the game in a direction he or she doesn't like. This approach can also slow the game if the DM focuses on one correct action that the characters must describe to overcome an obstacle. One example of the not make the players rule, if you feel like what they're doing would work 100 times out of 100 times. If a player is trying to persuade an NPC and they say something smart enough that anyone in the NPC's place would believe, or no, maybe not believe, if they present an argument that an NPC absolutely cannot refute in any way, that anyone would listen to it, regardless of how charismatic their interlocutor is, I wouldn't make them rule, because 1, it rewards their great role-playing and conversation, and 2, it just makes sense. If the player ruled poorly, what would you do the NPC do? Would you make them act illogically or out of their NPC's character just because that player made a bad roll? I suggest that you shouldn't do that. You should never do that. You should just tell the player, alright, regardless of how charismatic you are, the character is going to be convinced. I'm not sure how I would present it in words, really. But yeah, do these sort of things. And also about these plans. Sometimes the players come up with a plan that's always going to work, that you haven't thought about, for something that you intended to have a roll, and then do the same thing. And if a plan has, say, a chance of working, then roll, of course, but roll for things that can fail and don't roll for things that can't fail. That's the simple thing. Let's not get too into it. The middle path. Many DMs find that using a combination of the two approaches works best. By balancing the use of dice against deciding on success, you can encourage your players to strike a balance between relying on their bonuses and abilities and paying attention to the game and immersing themselves in its world. Remember that dice don't run your game. You do. Dice are like rules. They're tools to help the action moving. At any time you can decide that the player's action is automatically successful. This is what I'm talking about. You can also grant the player advantage on any ability check, reducing the chance of a bad die roll, foiling the character's plans. By the same token, a bad plan or unfortunate circumstances can transform the easiest task into an impossibility, or at least impose disadvantage. Using ability scores. When a player wants to do something, it's often appropriate to let the attempt succeed without a roll or a reference to the character's ability scores. For example, a character doesn't normally need to make a dexterity check to walk across an empty room, or a charisma check to order a mug of ale. Only call for a roll if there's a meaningful consequence for failure. When deciding whether to use a roll, ask yourself 2 questions. Is the task so easy and so free of conflict and stress that there should be no chance of failure? Is the task so inappropriate or impossible, such as hitting the moon with an arrow, that it can't work? If the answer to both of these questions is no, some kind of roll is appropriate. The following sections provide guidance on determining whether to call for an ability check, attack roll, or saving throw. How to assign DCs, when to use advantage and disadvantage, and other related topics. I feel like the writers of the book are on the same page with me on this one. This is mostly what I've been talking about. Ability checks. An ability check is the test to see whether a character succeeds at a task that he or she has decided to attempt. The player's handbook includes examples of what each ability score is used for. The ability checks table summarizes the material for easy reference. Multiple ability checks. Sometimes a character fails an ability check and wants to try again. In some cases, a character is free to do so. The only real cost is the time it takes. With enough attempts and enough time, a character should eventually succeed at the task. To speed things up, assume that the character spending 10 times the normal amount of time needed to complete a task automatically succeeds at that task. However, no amount of repeating the check allows a character to turn an impossible task into a successful one. In other cases, failing an ability check makes it impossible to make the same check to do the same thing again. For example, a rogue might try to trick a town guard into thinking the adventurers are undercover agents of the king. If the rogue loses a contest of charisma or deception against the guard's wisdom insight, the same lie told again won't work. The characters can come up with a different way to get past the guard, or try the check again against another guard at a different gate, but you might decide that the initial failure makes those checks more difficult to pull off. That's sound advice. Sound reasoning. I have nothing to comment on that one. Ability checks. Ability, strength, physical force and athleticism. Example uses: smash down a door, move a boulder, use a spike to wedge a door shut. Dexterity. Agility, reflexes and balance. Sneak past a guard, walk along a narrow edge, wriggle free from chains. Constitution. Stamina and health, endure a marathon, grasp hot metal without flinching, win a drinking contest. Intelligence, memory and reason. Recall a bit of lore, recognize a clue's significance, decode an encrypted message. Wisdom, perceptiveness and willpower. Spot a hidden creature, sense that someone is lying. Charisma, social influence and confidence. Persuade a creature to do something, cow a crowd, lie to someone convincingly. Contest. A contest is a kind of ability check that matches two creatures against each other. Use a contest if a character attempts something that either directly foils or is directly opposed by another creature's efforts. In a contest, the ability checks are compared to each other rather than to target number. When you call for a contest, you pick the ability that each side must use, deciding whether both sides use the same ability or whether different abilities should counter each other. For example, when a creature tries to hide, it engages in a contest of dexterity against wisdom. But if two creatures arm wrestle, or if one creature is holding a door closed against another's attempt to push it open, both use strength. Attack rolls. Call for an attack roll when a character tries to hit a creature or an object with an attack, especially when the attack could be foiled by the target's armor or shield or by another object providing cover. You can also use attack rolls to resolve non-combat activities such as archery contests or a game of darts. Saving throws. A saving throw is an instant response to a harmful effect that's almost never done by choice. A save makes the most sense when something bad happens to a character and the character has a chance to avoid that effect. An ability check is something a character actively attempts to accomplish, whereas a saving throw is a split-second response to the activity of someone or something else. Most of the time, a saving throw comes into play when an effect such as a spell, monster ability, or trap calls for it, telling you what kind of saving throw is involved and providing a DC for it. Other times a situation arises that clearly calls for a saving throw, especially when a character is subjected to a harmful effect that can't be hedged out by armor or a shield. It's up to you to decide which ability score is involved. The saving throws table offers suggestions. I'm very curious if they have suggestions, for example, for charisma saving throws, because those happen sometimes with spells, and I'm not sure why. It's interesting, but I'm not sure why. I'm not against it, but you know, it's just I'm not sure why. Intelligence check versus wisdom check. If you have trouble deciding whether to call for an intelligence or wisdom check to determine whether a character notices something, think of it in terms of what a very high or low score in these two abilities might mean. A character with high wisdom but low intelligence is aware of the surroundings but is bad at interpreting what things mean. The character might spot that one section of the wall is clean and dusty compared to the others, but he or she wouldn't necessarily make the deduction that a secret door is there. In contrast, a character with high intelligence and low wisdom is probably oblivious but clever. The character might not spot the clean section of the wall, but if asked about it, could immediately deduce why it's clean. Wisdom checks allow characters to perceive what is around them. The wall is clean here, while intelligence checks answer why things are that way. There's probably a secret door. Saving throws. Ability, strength, opposing a force that would physically move or bind you. Dexterity, dodging out of harm's way. Constitution, enduring a disease, poison or other hazard that saps vitality. Intelligence, disbelieving certain illusions and resisting mental assaults that can be refuted with logic, sharp memory or both. Wisdom, resisting effects that charm, frighten or otherwise assault your willpower. Charisma, withstanding effects such as possession that would subsume Okay, so that's the thing. That would subsume your personality or hurl you to another plane of existence. I'm not sure about the hurling you to another plane of existence, why that is, but we'll go with it. Difficulty class. It's your job to establish the difficulty class for an ability check or saving throw when a rule or an adventure doesn't give you one. Sometimes you even want to change such established DCs. When you do so, think of how difficult a task is and then pick the associated DC from the typical DCs table. Typical DCs task, very easy, DC 5, easy, DC 10, moderate, DC 15, hard, DC 20, very hard, DC 25, nearly impossible, DC 30. The numbers associated with these categories of difficulty are meant to be easy to keep in your head so that you don't have to refer to this book every time you decide on a DC. Here are some tips using DC categories at the gaming table. If you've decided that an ability check is called for, then most likely the task at hand isn't very easy. Most people can accomplish a DC 5 task with little chance of failure. Unless circumstances are unusual, let characters succeed at such a task without making a check. Then ask yourself, is this task difficulty easy, moderate or hard? If the only DCs you ever use are 10, 15 and 20, your game will run just fine. Keep in mind that a character with a 10 and the associated ability and no proficiency will succeed at an easy task around 50% of the time. A moderate task requires a higher score or proficiency for success, whereas a hard task typically requires both. A big dose of luck with a D20 also doesn't hurt. If you find yourself thinking, this task is especially hard, you can use a higher DC, but do so with caution and consider the level of your characters. A DC 25 task is very hard for low level characters to accomplish, but it becomes more reasonable after 10th level or so. A DC 30 check is nearly impossible for most low level characters. A 20th level character with proficiency and relevant ability score of 20 still needs a 19 or 20 on the die roll to succeed at a task of this difficulty. This is mostly stuff that I already knew, but it's kind of important. I suppose I was kind of underestimating how high should a DC be, something that's just hard. 20 to me feels like at level 1 it's very hard to get to 20. You have to be good at something and then be lucky too. Variant, automatic success. Sometimes the randomness of a D20 roll leads to ludicrous results. Let's say a door requires a successful DC 15 strength check to be battered down. A fighter with a strength of 20 might hopelessly fail against the door because of bad die rolls. Meanwhile, the rogue with a strength of 10 rolls a 20 and knocks the door from its hinges. If such results bother you, consider allowing automatic successes on certain checks. Under this optional rule, a character automatically succeeds on any ability check with a DC less than or equal to the relevant ability score minus 5. So in the example above, the fighter would automatically kick in the door. This rule doesn't apply to contests, saving throws, or attack rolls. Having proficiency with a skill or tool can also grant automatic success. If a character's proficiency bonus applies to his or her ability check, the character automatically succeeds if the DC is 10 or less. If that character is 11th level or higher, the check succeeds if the DC is 15 or less. The downside of this whole approach is its predictability. For example, once a character's ability score reaches 20, checks of DC 15 and lower using that ability become automatic successes. Smart players will then always match the characters with the highest ability score against any given check. If you want some risk of failure, you need to set higher DCs. Doing this though can aggravate the problem you're trying to solve. Higher DCs require higher die rolls and thus rely even more on luck. That's the thing. Just don't make that door close. Why have a task that's supposed to be trivialized by one of the characters? You know the characters that will be playing. You know that there's going to be a door there. Why even make it stuck if you know that the game has one character for whom it would make absolutely no sense to be stopped by a stuck door at all? It doesn't add anything to the narrative. I think in one of our past videos we talked about stuck doors. Yeah, we did talk about stuck doors, and that's my advice for you. Just don't present players with tasks that add nothing to the story. If it's expected to be trivial, why put it in there? Proficiency. When you ask a player to make an ability check, consider whether a skill or tool proficiency might apply to it. The player might also ask you if a particular proficiency applies. One way to think about this question is to consider whether a character could become better at a particular task through training and practice. If the answer is no, it's fine to say that no proficiency applies, but if the answer is yes, assign an appropriate skill or tool proficiency to reflect that training and practice. Skills. As described in the player's handbook, a skill proficiency represents a character's focus on one aspect of an ability. Among all the things the character's dexterity score describes, the character might be particularly skilled at sneaking around, reflected in proficiency in the stealth skill. When that skill is used for an ability check, it is usually used with dexterity. Under certain circumstances, you can decide a character's proficiency in a skill can be applied to a different ability check. For example, you might decide that a character forced to swim from an island to the mainland must succeed on a constitution check, as opposed to a strength check, because of the distance involved. The character is proficient in athletics skill, which covers swimming, so you allow the character's proficiency bonus to apply to this ability. In effect, you're asking for a constitution athletics check instead of a strength athletics check. Often players ask whether they can apply a skill proficiency to an ability check. If a player can provide a good justifications for why a character's training and aptitude in a skill should apply to the check, go ahead and allow it, rewarding the player's creative thinking. Tools. Having proficiency with a tool allows you to apply your proficiency bonus to an ability check to make using that tool. For example, a character proficient with a carpenter's tools can apply his or her proficiency bonus to a dexterity check to craft a wooden flute, an intelligence check to craft a wooden secret door, or a strength check to build a working trebuchet. However, the proficiency bonus doesn't apply to an ability check made to identify unsafe wooden construction or to discern the origin of a crafted item, since neither check requires tool use. This is actually pretty smart, the bit about applying different stats with abilities based normally on different stats when it's adequate, but I find that players newer to gaming, they find this whole rolling on ability checks and adding proficiency and an ability modifier, they feel lost in it, and I have a feeling that at least one of the players in my initial group is gonna have similar problems. As the DM, make sure you understand it and try to explain it to our players so that a newer player will eventually learn to do it themselves. But if they can't do it from the get-go, just do it for them. Maybe talk to them after the game. Saving throws and attack rolls. Characters are either proficient with a saving throw or attack, or they aren't. Bonus always applies if a character is proficient. Advantage and disadvantage. Advantage and disadvantage are amongst the most powerful tools in the DM's toolbox. They reflect temporary circumstances that might affect the chances of a character succeeding or failing at a task. Advantage is also a great way to reward a player who shows exceptional creativity in play. Characters often gain advantage or disadvantage through the use of special abilities, actions, spells, or other features of their classes or backgrounds. In some cases, you decide whether a circumstance influences a role in one direction or another, and you gain advantage or impose disadvantage as a result. Consider granting advantage when circumstances not related to a creature's inherent capabilities provide it with an edge. Some aspect of the environment contributes to the character's chance of success. A player shows exceptional creativity or cunning in attempting or describing a task. Previous actions, whether taken by the character making the attempt or some other creature, improve the chances of success. Consider imposing disadvantage when circumstances hinder success in some way. Some aspect of the environment makes success less likely, assuming that aspect doesn't already impose a penalty on the rule being made. An element of the plan or description of an action makes success less likely. Because advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out, there is no need to keep track of how many circumstances weigh on both sides. For example, imagine a wizard is running down a dungeon corridor to escape from a beholder. Around the corner ahead, two ogres lie in wait. Does the wizard hear the ogres readying their ambush? You look at the wizard's passive wisdom perception score and consider all the factors weighing on it. The wizard is running, not paying attention to what's ahead of him. This imposes disadvantage on the wizard's ability check. However, the ogres are readying a particular trap and making a lot of noise with a winch. That word in my mnemonics. How do you say that? I was kind of hoping that it wouldn't appear anymore in the book. Okay, so have the ogres are readying a particular trap and making a lot of noise with a winch, which could grant the wizard advantage on the check. As a result, the character has neither advantage nor disadvantage on the wisdom check, and you don't need to consider any additional factors. Past encounters with an ogre ambush, the fact that the wizard's ears are still ringing from the thunder wave spell he cast at the beholder. The overall noise level of the dungeon, none of that matters anymore. They all cancel out. Inspiration. Awarding inspiration is an effective way to encourage role-playing and risk-taking. As explained in the player's handbook, having inspiration gives the player an obvious benefit, being able to gain advantage on one ability check, attack rolls or saving throw. Remember that the character can have no more than one inspiration at a time. Awarding inspiration. Think of inspiration as a spice that you can use to enhance your campaign. Some DMs forgo using inspiration, while others embrace it as a key part of the game. If you take away anything from this section, remember this golden rule. Inspiration should make the game more enjoyable for everyone. Award inspiration when players take actions that make the game more exciting, amusing, or memorable. As a rule of thumb, aim to award inspiration to each character about once per session of play. Over time, you might want to award inspiration more or less often, at a rate that works best for your table. You might use the same rate for your entire DMing career, or you might change it with each campaign. Offering inspiration as a reward encourages certain types of behavior in your player. Think of your style as a DM and your group's preferences. What helps make the game more fun for your group? What type of actions fit in with your campaign's style or genre? Your answers to those questions help determine when you award inspiration. I'm not sold on inspiration either way. I haven't played D&D as a DM at all, so I guess I'm gonna make up my mind after a bit, after trying it out, I guess. But if a player did something so in character that it would blow me away, I would just give them inspiration, I think. Role-playing. Using inspiration to reward role-playing is a good place to start for most groups. Reward the player with inspiration when the player causes his or her character to do something that is consistent with the character's personality, trait, flaw, or bond. Whoa there, that's baseline, that's expected. That's not what calls for a reward, come on. Come on, wizards. The character's action should be notable in some way. It might drive the story forward, push the adventurers into danger, or make everyone at the table laugh. In essence, you reward the player for role-playing in a way that makes the game more enjoyable for everyone else. Take into account each player's role-playing style and try not to favor one style over another. What's role-playing style? There's no such thing as role-playing style, I guess. There's different characters. One player can play an edgy, like the classic edgy fantasy character, and another could be playing a comic relief, I suppose you could call it. But that's not role-playing style, it's just character difference. I'm not sure what they mean. For example, okay, they give an example. For example, Alison might be comfortable speaking in an accent and adopting her character's mannerisms, but Paul feels self-conscious when trying to act and prefers to describe his character's attitude and actions. Neither style is better than the other. Whoa. Obviously the first style is better than the other. They're trying not to hurt people's feelings if they can't roleplay, which is understandable. Roleplaying is kind of corny at times and it makes you cringe sometimes. You're gonna cringe once or twice during your career in tabletop role-playing games, so just accept it, accept the cringe, and you're gonna be happier. But anyway, one is clearly better. Paul needs to man up and stop being self-conscious and act in character. I personally hate it when people are describing what their characters do in third person. Well, what they do, you do describe it in third person, but what they say, when a player describes what their character says in third person, for example, John asks the barmaid for directions or orders a beer. If they do it once, it's fine, just to expedite the thing. I recall the player's handbook telling us that you can do it like all of your character's lines in that way, and to me, you're not playing a role if you're doing it. That would not be very welcome at my table, because you're not playing a role. I have nothing personally against Paul or anything like that. You're missing out on the true joy of being your character if you do it like that. So I firmly disagree with what they're saying here, but I know why they're saying it. They're saying it because they want to include a broader audience, include people who might not feel comfortable. It's a noble reason to be like that, but no. I mean, saying I seduced the dragon and saying, oh great, thick dragon, may you spend the night with me, is basically the same thing. Well, not really. If a player at my table told me I seduced the dragon, I would tell them, go ahead. Let me hear you seduce me as I play as the dragon. I would cringe real hard, by the way, but still I do it. And it really brings like a different thing to the game. If a player says to me, I convince the god to let me in, that's not role-playing at all, he just wants to get in. What I'm saying is, some people don't really like acting like they seduce a dragon when the dragon is some person you don't know, or worse, you actually know. Yeah, it's very cringy. I want my players to actually do the things in an adventure that they want to do and make the characters that they want to later be. Maybe you made a mistake by playing the sort of character that would want to seduce a dragon. I feel like, yeah, I'm totally on board with you that trying to seduce your DM is absolutely mortifying, or being a DM that is getting seduced by your player as a dragon, that's equally mortifying. That's even worse probably, because you didn't sign up for it and the player did sign up for it. But it takes away from the game if you don't roleplay. Roleplay to me is playing the character. A tabletop RPG to me has a little bit of theater to it. It, I think, appeals to people who, I don't know, maybe they'd find fun in being an actor, right? Relaying everything or even anything that's important in third person, it strips off that layer. I can't have that really, and cringe is the price we all have to pay. When I convince a dragon that is different than going to a tavern and trying to get together with a sexy bartender, well, here's the thing. To me, both of these things are kinda, they don't sit right with me at a role-playing game table. I know players like to do these sort of things. I've been a DM, but to me they're not different at all, and they're both kind of cringe. I want to have players do heroic things, do interesting things, the swashbuckling, the betrayal, the intrigue, these sort of things, and I want them to be in character throughout the entire thing. When I'm the character, I want to be in character through the entire thing, and I want all the other players to be in character throughout the entire thing. You get incidental banter, you get funny dialogue, you get a lot of great things out of it. That makes a difference to me. Obviously you can run your games differently, and that's fine with me. I'm not gonna say that my way is better, but I mentioned it earlier in the stream, but I've actually played with a player who would relay everything his character said in third person, and we were both players in that campaign. I hated it, like absolutely hated it. It felt so wrong, and his character felt so wooden. And also, another thing, when you have the rule of saying everything you say in character, it eliminates things that you and the players collectively don't want in your story. If something is so cringe that the player will find it too embarrassing to say, he's not gonna say it. Maybe it's better that he's not gonna say it. Maybe it's better if he says something else instead. I see all upsides to having first person speech and all downside to having third person speech. So they say neither style is better than the other. Inspiration encourages players to take part and make a good effort, and awarding it fairly makes the game better for everyone. Heroism. You can use inspiration to encourage player characters to make risks. A fighter might not normally hurl himself over a balcony to land in the midst of a pack of hungry ghouls, but you can reward the character's daring maneuver with inspiration. Such a reward tells the players that you want them to embrace swashbuckling action. When a player does something risky or borderline suicidal, it's a good idea, I think, to just give them inspiration. They're gonna need it, and they're not gonna feel too bad about doing it. This approach is great for campaigns that emphasize action-packed heroics. For such campaigns, consider allowing inspiration to be spent after a D20 roll, rather than before. This approach turns inspiration into a cushion against failure, and a guarantee that it comes into play only when the player is faced directly by failure. Such an assurance makes risky tactics less daunting. A reward for victory. Some DMs prefer to play an impartial role in their campaigns. Inspiration normally requires the DM's judgment to award, which might run against your style if you like a campaign where you let dice determine most outcomes. If that's your style, consider using inspiration as a reward when the characters achieve an important goal or story, representing a surge of confidence and energy. Using this model, give everyone in the party inspiration if the characters manage to defeat a powerful foe, execute a cunning plan, or achieve a goal, or otherwise overcome a daunting obstacle in the campaign. Genre emulation. Inspiration is a handy tool for reinforcing the conventions of a particular genre. Under this approach, think of the motives of a genre as personality traits, flaws or bonds that can apply to any of the adventurers. For example, in a campaign inspired by a film noir, characters could have an additional flaw. I can't resist helping a person I find alluring despite warnings that he or she is nothing but trouble. If the characters agree to help a suspicious but seductive noble and thereby become entangled in a web of intrigue and betrayal, reward them with inspiration. Similarly, characters in a horror story typically can't help but spend a night in a haunted house to learn its secrets. They probably also go off alone when they shouldn't. If the party splits up, consider giving each character inspiration. A sensible person would avoid the noble's intrigues and a haunted house, but in film noir or horror, we're not dealing with sensible people. We're dealing with protagonists in a particular type of story. For this approach to work, create a list of your genre's main convention and share it with your players. Before the campaign begins, talk about the list to make sure your group is on board for embracing these conventions. Players and inspiration. Remember that the player with inspiration can award it to another player. Some groups even like to treat inspiration as a group resource, deciding collectively to spend it on a roll. It's best to let players award the inspiration as they see fit, but feel free to talk to them about following certain guidelines, particularly if you're trying to reinforce conventions of a certain genre. I don't really like the idea of using inspiration to try and reinforce conventions of a certain genre. If you and your players want to play in a genre, they're all going to play characters that fit in the genre, and if they end up not playing that, that means they probably weren't that interested in the first place. I don't really want to force anything through inspiration. I don't think that's a good tool for it, or that you should do it at all. When do you award inspiration? Consider the timing of your inspiration awards. Some DMs like to award inspiration in response to an action. Other DMs like to encourage specific actions by offering inspiration while a player is considering options. Both approaches have their strengths and weaknesses. Waiting until after an action preserves the flow of play, but it also means players don't know whether their decisions will earn them inspiration. It also means the player can't spend the inspiration on the act that earned it unless you allow a player to retroactively spend it or are quick enough to award it before any rolls. This approach works best for groups that want to focus on immersion and player agency, where the DM steps back and gives the players more freedom to do what they want, manipulating the players or making choices for them. Offering inspiration before an action works great with groups that are comfortable with an emphasis on genre emulation and group storytelling, where character freedom isn't as important as weaving a compelling tale together. Okay, so I don't think these two are mutually exclusive. Start with awarding inspiration after an action, especially for your first campaign or when playing with a new group. This approach is the least disruptive to the flow of play and avoids making the players feel as if you are being manipulative. Tracking inspiration. A player typically notes on a character sheet whether he or she has inspiration, or you can use poker chips or some other token. Alternatively, you can hand out special d20s to represent inspiration. When a player spends inspiration, he or she rolls the die and then hands it back to you. If the player instead gives the inspiration to someone else, the d20 can go to that person. I probably don't have enough d20s to do that, but I like this idea of actually physically giving someone the die, because you can do it without words. And when I played Fate, you could award fate points, right? I used little tokens for that. It's great because you don't have to say anything, you can just give it or offer it. In Fate, you also had little bits of bargaining where you can offer something to a player for giving into the flaw. That way, offering the physical object is very convenient. Ignoring inspiration. Inspiration might not work for your campaign. Some DMs feel it adds a layer of metagame thinking, and others feel that heroism, roleplaying, and other parts of the game are their own rewards that don't need incentives like inspiration. I mentioned earlier that I'm on the fence with inspiration, and this is mostly why. Because I feel like heroism and role-playing cool stuff is a reward in and of itself. But at the same time, I might be tempted to give out inspiration for certain things. In the example where a character jumps from a balcony into a bunch of ghouls for story reasons, I respect that, and I'd be tempted to give inspiration for that. If you choose to ignore inspiration, you're telling the players that your campaign is one where you let the dice fall where they may. It's a good option for gritty campaigns, or ones where the DM focuses on playing an impartial rule as a rules arbiter. Variant. Only players award inspiration. As a DM, you have a lot to track during the game. Sometimes you can lose track of inspiration and forget to award it. As a variant rule, you can allow the players to handle awarding inspiration entirely. During every session, each player can award inspiration to another player. A player follows whatever guidelines the group has agreed on for awarding inspiration. This approach makes your life easier and also gives players the chance to recognize each other for good play. You still need to make sure that inspiration is being awarded fairly. This approach makes your life easier and also gives the players a chance to recognize each other for good play. You still need to make sure that the inspiration is being awarded fairly. This approach works best with groups that are focused on the story. It falls flat if the players merely manipulate it to gain advantage in key situations, without earning inspiration by way of good role-playing, or whatever other criteria the group has established. In this variant, you can allow each player to award inspiration more than once per session. If you do so, the first time that a player awards inspiration in a session is free. Whenever that player awards it later in the game session, you gain inspiration that you can spend to give advantage to any foe of the player characters. There's no limit to the number of inspiration you can gain in this way, and unspent inspiration carries over from one session to the next. I feel like that's going in too hard on the whole inspiration thing. I don't much like it, and it kind of takes you out from the character. Resolution and consequences. You determine the consequences of attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. In most cases, doing so is straightforward. When an attack hits, it deals damage. When a creature fails a saving throw, the creature suffers a harmful effect. When an ability check equals or exceeds the DC, the check succeeds. As a DM, you have a variety of flourishes and approaches you can take when adjudicating success and failure to make things a little less black and white. Success at a cost. Failure can be tough, but the agony is compounded when a character fails by the barest margin. When a character fails a roll by 1 or 2, you can allow the character to succeed at the cost of a complication or hindrance. Such complication can run along any of the following lines. A character manages to get her sword past the hobgoblin's defenses and turn a near miss into a hit, but the hobgoblin twists its shield and disarms her. That's almost worse than missing, I think. Maybe that's worse than missing, actually. A character narrowly escapes the full brunt of a fireball, but ends up prone. A character fails to intimidate a kobold prisoner, but the kobold reveals its secrets anyway, while shrieking at the top of its lungs, alerting other nearby monsters. A character manages to finish an arduous climb to the top of the cliff, despite slipping, only to realize that the rope on which his companions dangle below him is close to breaking. That's horrible. When you introduce costs such as these, try to make them obstacles and setbacks that change the nature of the adventuring situation. In exchange for successes, players must consider new ways of facing the challenge. You can also use this technique when a character succeeds on a roll by hitting the DC exactly, complicating marginal success in interesting ways. Degrees of failure. Sometimes a failed ability check has different consequences depending on the degree of failure. For example, a character who fails to disarm the trapped chest might accidentally spring the trap if the check fails by 5 or more, whereas a lesser failure means the trap wasn't triggered during the botched disarm attempt. Consider adding similar distinctions to other checks. Perhaps a failed charisma persuasion check means the queen won't help, whereas a failure of 5 or more means she throws you in the dungeon for your impudence. Critical success or failure. Rolling a 20 or a 1 on an ability check or saving throw doesn't normally have any special effect. However, you can choose to take such exceptional roll into account when adjudicating the outcome. It's up to you to determine how this manifests in the game. An easy approach is to increase the impact of the success or failure. For example, rolling a 1 on a failed attempt to pick a lock might break the thief's tools being used, and rolling a 20 on a successful intelligence investigation check might reveal an extra clue. Exploration. This section provides guidance for running exploration, especially travel, tracking, and visibility. Using a map, whatever environment the adventurers are exploring, you can use a map to follow their progress as you relate the details of their travels. In a dungeon, tracking movement on a map lets you describe the branching passages, doors, chambers, and other features the adventurers encounter as they go, and gives the players the opportunity to choose their own path. Similarly, a wilderness map can show roads, rivers, terrain, and other features that might guide the characters on their travels or lead them astray. The Map Travel Pace table helps you track travel on maps of different scales. The table shows how much distance on a map the adventurers can cover on foot in minutes, hours, or days. The table uses the travel paces slow, normal, and fast, described in the player's handbook. Characters moving at a normal pace can walk about 24 miles in a day. Map travel pace. Dungeon, 1 square, 10 feet. Slope. Okay, let's not read that, that's kind of boring. Special travel pace. The rules on travel pace in the player's handbook assume that a group of travelers adopts a pace that over time is unaffected by the individual member's walking speeds. The difference between walking speeds can be significant during combat, but during an overland journey, the difference vanishes as travelers pause to catch their breath. The faster ones wait for the slower ones, and one traveler's quickness is matched by another traveler's endurance. A character bestride a phantom steed, soaring through the air on a carpet of flying, or riding a sailboat, or a steam-powered gnomish contraption, doesn't travel at a normal rate, since magic, engine, or wind doesn't tire the way a creature does, and the air doesn't contain the types of obstructions found on land. When a creature is traveling with a flying speed or with a speed granted by magic, an engine, or a natural force such as wind or water current, translate that speed into travel rates using the following rules. About this travel thing, I probably wouldn't be too into calculating travel speeds precisely. Unless how fast you can travel is an important part of your story, I would just eyeball it, I wouldn't worry about it. But let's keep reading. In 1 minute, you can move a number of feet equal to your speed times 10. In 1 hour, you can move a number of miles equal to your speed divided by 10. For daily travel, multiply your hourly rate of travel by the number of hours traveled, typically 8 hours. For a fast pace, increase the rate of travel by 1/3. For a slow pace, multiply the rate by 2/3. For example, a character under the effect of Windwalk spell gains a flying speed of 300 feet. In 1 minute, the character can move 3,000 feet at a normal pace, 4,000 feet at a fast pace, or 2,000 feet at a slow pace. Character can also cover 20, 30 or 40 miles in an hour. The spell lasts for 8 hours, allowing the character to travel 160, 240 or 320 miles in a day. Similarly, a Phantom Steed spell creates a magical mount with a speed of 100 feet that doesn't tire like a real horse. A character on a Phantom Steed can cover 1,000 feet in 1 minute at a normal pace, 133 feet at a fast pace and 666 feet at a slow pace. In 1 hour, the character can travel 7, 10 or 13 miles. Alright, do you guys want to hear a twist? I only can use the metric system because I'm from Europe, and all of these measurements, I can't imagine. My imagination basically doesn't work with feet, miles and that sort of thing. It has to be the metric system or I can't imagine anything. But I still read it, and I assume it kind of makes sense. I don't know. Cool twist, huh? Visibility outdoors. When traveling outdoors, characters can see about 2 miles in any direction on a clear day. 6 sense kind of deal. This twist. Or until the point where the trees, hills or other obstructions block their view. Rain normally cuts maximum visibility down to 1 mile, and fog can cut it down between 100 and 300 feet. On a clear day, the characters can see 40 miles if they are atop a mountain or a tall hill, or are otherwise able to look down on the area around them from a height. Noticing other creatures. While exploring, characters might encounter other creatures. An important question in such a situation is who notices whom. Indoors, whether the sides can see one another usually depends on the configuration of rooms and passageways. Vision might also be limited by light sources. Outdoor visibility can be hampered by terrain, weather, and time of day. Creatures can be more likely to hear one another before they see anything. If neither side is being stealthy, creatures automatically notice each other once they are within sight or hearing range of one another. Otherwise, compare the dexterity stealth check results of the creatures in the group that is hiding with the passive wisdom perception scores of the other group as explained in the player's handbook. There we go. Tracking. Adventurers sometimes choose their path by following the tracks of other creatures, or other creatures might track the adventurers. To track one or more creatures must succeed on a wisdom survival check. You might require trackers to make a new check in any of the following circumstances. They stop tracking and resume after finishing a short or long rest. The trail crosses an obstacle such as a river that shows no tracks. The weather conditions or terrain changes in a way that makes tracking harder. The DC for the character depends on how well the ground shows signs of creatures' passage. No roll is necessary in situations where the tracks are obvious. For example, no check is needed to track an army advancing along a muddy road. Spotting tracks on a bare stone floor is much more challenging, unless the creature being tracked leaves a distinct trail. Additionally, the passage of time often makes tracks harder to follow. In a situation where there is no trail to follow, you can rule that tracking is impossible. The tracking DC table offers guidelines for setting the DC, or if you prefer, you can choose a DC based on your assessment of the difficulty. You can also grant advantage on the check if there's more than one set of tracks to follow, or disadvantage if the trail being followed passes through a well-trafficked area. On a failed check, the character loses the trail, but can attempt to find it again by making a careful search of the area. It takes 10 minutes to find a trail in confined area, such as dungeons or 1 hour outdoors. Tracking DCs, ground surface DC, soft surface such as snow, DC 10, dirt or grass DC 15, bare stone DC 20, each day since the creature passed +5. Creature left a trail such as blood, -5. Social interaction. During a social interaction, the adventurers usually have a goal. They want to extract information, secure aid, win someone's trust, escape punishment, avoid combat, negotiate a treaty, or achieve whatever other objective led to the interaction in the first place. The creatures they interact with also have agendas. Some DMs prefer to run a social interaction as free-form role-playing exercise, where dice rarely come into play. Other DMs prefer to resolve the outcome of an interaction by having characters make charisma checks. Either approach works, and most games fall somewhere in between. balancing player skills, role-playing and persuading, with character skill, reflected by ability checks. Resolving interactions. The player's handbook provides guidelines for balancing role-playing and ability checks in a social interaction. See Chapter 8 Adventuring in that book. This section adds to that material by providing a structured way to resolve a social interaction. Much of this structure will be invisible to your players in play and isn't meant to be a substitute for role-playing. 1. Starting attitude. Choose the starting attitude of a creature the adventurers are interacting with, friendly, indifferent, or hostile. A friendly creature wants to help the adventurers and wishes for them to succeed. For tasks or actions that require no particular risk, effort, or cost, friendly creatures usually help without question. If an element of personal risk is involved, a successful charisma check might be required to convince a friendly creature to take that risk. An indifferent creature might help or hinder the party, depending on what the creature sees as most beneficial. A creature's indifference doesn't necessarily make it standoffish or disinterested. Indifferent creatures might be polite and genial, surly and irritable, or anything in between. A successful charisma check is necessary when the adventurers try to persuade an indifferent creature to do something. A hostile creature opposes the adventurers and their goals, but doesn't necessarily attack them on sight. For example, a condescending noble might wish to see a group of upstart adventurers fail, so as to keep them from becoming rivals for the king's attention, thwarting them with slander and scheming rather than direct threats and violence. The adventurers need to succeed on one or more challenging charisma checks to convince a hostile creature to do anything on their behalf. That said, a hostile creature might be so ill-disposed toward the party that no charisma check can improve its attitude, in which case any attempt to sway it through diplomacy fails automatically. 2. Conversation. Play out the conversation. Let the adventurers make their points, trying to frame their statements in terms that are meaningful to the creature they are interacting with. Changing attitude. The attitude of a creature might change over the course of a conversation. If the adventurers say or do the right thing during an interaction, perhaps by touching on a creature's ideal, bond, or flaw, they can make a hostile creature temporarily indifferent, or make an indifferent creature temporarily friendly. Likewise, a gaffe, insult, or harmful deed might make a friendly creature temporarily indifferent, or turn an indifferent creature hostile. Whether the adventurers can shift the creature's attitude is up to you. You decide whether the adventurers have successfully couched their statements in terms that matter to the creature. Typically, a creature's attitude can't shift more than one step during a single interaction, whether temporarily or permanently. Okay, so I have my thoughts on this whole attitude business. I feel like it's not necessary to codify these things into game mechanics, such as like having tiers and based on the conversation having it jump or drop tiers, and think about it this way. It's easier and it's much more fun for the DM if you just play the creatures if you would play your own characters, and players don't really need to have these sort of attitudes mentally prepared for anything, and they can play their characters just fine. You can do the same for NPCs. It's much more fun. Let's not be too strict about rules. Let's not add too many rules too, because it's hard to keep track of. Determining characteristics. The characteristics don't necessarily enter into social interaction with a full understanding of a creature's ideal, bond, or flaw. If they want to shift the creature's attitude by playing on these characteristics, they first need to determine what the creature cares about. They can guess, but doing so runs the risk of shifting the creature's attitude in the wrong direction if they guess badly. After interacting with the creature long enough to get a sense of its personality traits and characteristics through conversation, an adventurer can attempt a wisdom insight check to uncover one of the creature's characteristics. You set the DC. A check that fails by 10 or more might misidentify a characteristic, so you should provide a false characteristic or invert one of the creature's existing characteristics. For example, if an old sage's flaw is that he is prejudiced against the uneducated, an adventurer who badly fails the check might be told that the sage enjoys personally seeing to the education of the downtrodden. Alright, so I don't like this idea to have an insight check for revealing a creature's characteristic. It should come up in the conversation, and the player, as a player, not as his character, should pick up on it. It's much more role-playing like. Given time, adventurers can also learn about a creature's characteristics from other sources, including its friends and allies, personal letters, and publicly told stories. Acquiring such information might be the basis of an entirely different set of social interactions. And I think like rolling to determine if a player guessed a characteristic of an NPC they're talking with kind of hampers the social interaction. It slows it down at the very least. Charisma check. When the adventurers get to the point of the request, demand, or suggestion, or if you decide the conversation has run its course, call for a charisma check. Any character who has actively participated in the conversation can make the check. Depending on how the adventurers handled the conversation, persuasion, deception, or intimidation skill might apply to the check. The creature's current attitude determines the DC required to achieve a specific reaction, as shown in the conversation reaction table. In my games, I would absolutely ignore this part of the rulebook. Aiding the check, other characters who make substantial contributions to the conversation can help the characters making the check. If a helping character says or does something that would influence the interaction in a positive way, the character making the charisma check can do so with advantage. If the other character inadvertently says something counterproductive or offensive, the character making the charisma check has disadvantage on that check. Multiple checks. Certain situations might call for more than one check, particularly if the adventurers come into the interaction with multiple goals. Okay, so this is like more of the same with the conversation bits. Did we skip that conversation reaction table? I think we did. But anyway, my advice for DMs is don't turn your social interaction in the game into another mini game, into rolling die and seeing who got better rules, who won. It kind of takes away from the role playing in the role playing game. It maybe makes it more of a game, but it takes away from the role playing, and it makes the game much less cinematic. Conversation and slower. Conversation reactions. I might not have read that, so we're gonna read through that again. DC 0. The creature does as asked without taking risks or making sacrifices. 10. The creature accepts a minor risk or sacrifice to do as asked. 20. The creature accepts a significant risk or sacrifice to do as asked. DC. And different creatures' reaction. DC 0. The creature offers no help but does no harm. 10. The creature does as asked as long as no risks or sacrifices are involved. 20. The creature accepts a minor risk or sacrifice to do as asked. DC 20. Hostile creature's reaction. 0. The creature opposes the adventurer's actions and might take risks to do so. 10. The creature offers no help but does no harm. 20. The creature does as asked as long as no risks or sacrifices are involved. Repeat. Once a charisma check has been made, further attempts to influence the target of the interaction might be fruitless or run the risk of upsetting or angering the subject creature, potentially shifting its attitude towards hostility. Use your best judgment. For example, if the party's rogue says something that pushes a noble's attitude towards the party from indifferent to hostile, another character might be able to diffuse the noble's hostility with clever role-playing and a successful charisma persuasion check. So I'd probably allow a different player to try and persuade the noble, but I'd say if the rogue wanted to try again, I'd probably not let them. I'd let them talk, obviously, and unless they really impressed me with roleplay, I wouldn't let them make another roll, I guess. Roleplaying. For some DMs, roleplaying comes naturally. If it doesn't come natural to you, don't worry. The main thing is for you to have fun portraying your NPCs and monsters, and to amuse your players in the process. You don't need to be a practiced thespian or comedian to create drama or humor. The key is to pay attention to the story elements and characterizations that make your players laugh or feel emotionally engaged, and to incorporate those things into your role-playing. I love role-playing, honestly, but there's one thing that I'm not fine with. Well, maybe I am fine with it, but I don't feel confident about. And it's voices and accents. I can't really do voices and accents. Or at least I don't feel like I can do voices and accents. And I sort of want to work on it. I want to try it, but it's difficult. Especially in a foreign language. I can actually do accents and mannerisms. More mannerisms than accents, but I can do accents and mannerisms in Polish, my native language. And I haven't tried that in English, but I'm kind of afraid. I'm hardly doing like the normal accent. I'm trying to make myself sound normal English speaking. I couldn't possibly attempt Scottish accent or Irish accent in a game. I'd fail so hard. Probably, maybe. Oh, actually, if my players didn't mind me being horrible at an accent, I would totally do it. I'd feel absolutely comfortable doing it. But I don't want to ruin the character for the players or get them out of their immersion by doing an absolutely atrocious accent. That's my worry. I don't worry at all about making a fool of myself. That's very not me. I might actually bring that up at session 0. Do you guys mind if I try to do an accent and I fail horribly? Will it take you out of your immersion? Like, I might ask that. In these words, no less. Being the NPC, imagine how a character or monster you bring to life would react to the adventurers. Consider what it cares about. does it have any ideals, flaws, or bonds? By working such things into your portrayal, you not only make the character or monster more believable, but you also enhance the sense that the adventurers are in a living world. Strive for responses and actions that introduce twists into the game. For example, an old woman whose family was killed at the hands of an evil wizard might regard the party's wizard with grave suspicion. However you roleplay a character or monster, the classic advice for writers holds true. Show, don't tell. For example, rather than describe an NPC as shallow and self-centered, have the individual act the way you would expect a shallow, self-centered person to behave. The NPC might have off-the-cuff answers for everything, an over-willingness to share personal anecdotes, and a desperate need to make himself or herself the subject of every conversation. I think I would never describe the personality of an NPC to my players as he's a shallow, self-centered person, because, you know, it's for them to judge. They might not see him as shallow. Just be the person. Try to be the person. Using your voice. Most of what you say during a session will be at a consistent level. For dramatic effect, be ready to shout out a battle cry or speak in a conspirational whisper. I'm not gonna shout out a battle cry because I have neighbors and my neighbors would be unhappy if I shouted out a battle cry. But other than that, I'm up for pretty much anything, so long as I feel like I can do it. Also, characters and monsters with distinctive voices are memorable. If you're not a natural mimic or actor, borrowing distinctive speech patterns from real life, the movies or television, is a good place to start. Practice different voices and impersonations of famous people. Then use those voices to bring out your NPCs. I actually might. Wouldn't be horrible if I did this on stream. Rate my NPC stream where I do NPC voices and people can heckle me on Twitch. That would be awesome, provided that we had the people to heckle me, which is not always the case in the channel, but I'd love to do that. And I'd love to improve my accents and voices. Yeah. Experiment with different speech patterns. For instance, a barmaid and a city magistrate should probably use their words differently. By the way, in Polish, I make a really good peasant. I haven't done that in quite a while, but I have some really memorable dialogues with my players as like a peasant or a vendor. Experiment with different speech patterns. For instance, a barmaid and a city magistrate probably use their words differently. Similarly, peasants could speak in earthy dialects, while rich folk talk in haughty drawls. Let the pirate NPC say, "Arr, mateys." Long John Silver voice. What's my best? "Arr, mateys." Is there anything you're supposed to do here? With your voice, intonation, or whatever? "Arr, mateys." I don't know. I don't know what I should strive for, realistically. Let intelligent monsters, unfamiliar with common, stumble along with awkward grammar. Let drunkards and monsters mutter with slurred speech, while lizard folk hiss their threats. In any interaction with multiple NPCs, make sure the adventurer remains the focus. Have the NPCs talk to them, not so much to each other. If possible, let one NPC do most of the talking, but if multiple NPCs need to talk, give them distinct voices so the players know who's who. That's difficult. That's always difficult when you have to talk to yourself in the voices of two NPCs. Always difficult. Using your face and arms. Use your facial expression to help show your character's emotions. Scowl, smile, grin, snarl, pout, cross your eyes, do whatever it takes to make the character or monster memorable to the players. When you combine facial expressions with an unusual voice, a character truly comes to life. Though you don't need to stand out of your chair, you can use your arms and bring even more life to an NPC. A noble could chop the air with one hand while speaking in a deadpan monotone, while an archmage might express her displeasure by silently rolling her eyes, massaging her temples with her fingers. Engaging the players. Some players enjoy role-playing and interaction more than others. Whatever your players' taste, your lively portrayal of NPCs and monsters can inspire players to make just as much investment in portraying their characters. This makes social interactions an opportunity for everyone to become more immersed in the game, creating a story whose protagonists have depth. To make sure everyone has something to do during a role-playing heavy game session, consider one or more of the following approaches. Appeal to player preferences. There are in-game activities that players enjoy more than others. As discussed in the player's introduction, players who like acting thrive in interaction situations, and it's fine to let those people take the spotlight. They often inspire other players by their example, but make sure those other players have an opportunity to join in the fun. Players who like exploring and storytelling are usually amenable to role-playing as long as it moves the campaign forward and reveals more about the world. Players who like problem-solving often enjoy figuring out the right thing to say to shift an NPC's attitude. Players who are instigators like provoking reactions from NPCs, so they're often easily engaged, though not always productively. Players who like to optimize their characters and slay monsters also like to argue, and having conflict within an interaction can help those players embrace role-playing. Still, creating combat connections to an extended interaction, such as a corrupt vizier sending assassins to kill the adventurers, is often the best way to keep action-focused players engaged. I wonder, as a DM, I've never played with someone who's a min-maxer optimizer kind of player, but I'm worried. If I get a player like that, I kind of worry that we might not see eye to eye as to what the game is supposed to be, because I have a feeling that D&D has this large subgroup of people who would feel equally at home in a war game, because they're not here much for the role-playing, but they like their stats and their rolling and the ability to make their characters stronger and just engage their creativity in the rules. Other role-playing games that I've played, they don't necessarily have these types of players, so everyone at the table is always there for the role-playing. Everyone at the table is always there for the role-playing. So yeah, that's kind of new to me. I'm not that sort of player really myself, so I can't say that I understand them well. Target specific characters. Create situations where characters who might not otherwise be engaged with their social interactions have to do at least some of the talking. Perhaps the NPC in question is a family member or a contact of a particular adventurer and talks only to that character. An NPC of a certain race or class might listen only to characters he or she feels kinship with. Creating a sense of importance can be a great way to get specific players engaged, but don't shut out players who are already role-playing. If a couple of players are dominating the conversation, take a moment now and then to involve the characters. You can do this in character if you like. And what about your hulking friend, Speak Barbarian? What will you pledge in exchange for my favor? Or just ask the player what his or her character is doing while the conversation is going on. The first approach is better for players who are already comfortable speaking in their characters' voices. The second approach works better for players who need encouragement to engage in a role-playing scenario. Objects. When characters need to saw through ropes, shatter a window, or smash a vampire's coffin, the only hard and fast rule is this: given enough time and the right tools, characters can destroy any destructible object. Use common sense when determining a character's success at damaging an object. Can a fighter cut through a section of stone wall with a sword? No. The sword is likely to break before the wall does. For the purpose of these rules, an object is a discrete inanimate item like a window, door, sword, book, table, chair or stone, not a building or a vehicle that is composed of many other objects. Statistics for objects. When time is a factor, you can assign an armor class and hit points to a destructible object. You can also give it immunities, resistances, and vulnerabilities to specific types of damage. Armor class. An object's armor class is a measure of how difficult it is to deal damage to the object when striking it, because the object has no chance of dodging out of the way. The object armor class table provides suggested AC values for various substances. Object armor class substance. Cloth, paper or rope. Armor class 11. Crystal, glass or ice. Armor class 13. Wood, bone. Armor class 15. Stone, armor class 17. Iron, steel, armor class 19. Mithril, armor class 21. Adamantine, armor class 23. So adamantine is pretty hard to damage. I wonder if it also changes how many hit points an object should have. Hit points. An object's hit points measure how much damage it can take before losing its structural integrity. Resilient objects have more hit points than fragile ones. Large objects also tend to have more hit points than small ones, unless breaking a small part of the object is just as effective as breaking the whole thing. The object hit points table provides suggested hit points for fragile and resilient objects that are large or smaller. Object hit point size. Tiny, bottle or a lock. Fragile, 2 or 1d4. Resilient, 5 or 2d4. Small, chest or a loot. Fragile is 3 or 1d6. Resilient is 10 or 3d6. Medium, barrel or chandelier. Fragile is 4 or 1d8. Resilient is 18 or 4d8. Large, cart, 10 foot by 10 foot window. Fragile is 5, 1d10. And resilient is 27. Well, I guess that a window is made out of glass. It shouldn't have that much hit points, honestly. If you hit a window, it should crumble. Or crumble, it should break. Crumble is not that sort of verb we'd use for a window. Huge and gargantuan objects. Normal weapons are of little use against many huge and gargantuan objects, such as a colossal statue, towering column of stone, or massive boulder. That said, one torch can burn a huge tapestry, and an earthquake spell can reduce a colossus to rubble. You can track a huge or gargantuan object's hit points if you like, or you can simply decide how long the object can withstand whatever weapon or force is acting against it. If you track hit points for the object, divide it into large or small sections and track each section's hit points separately. Destroying one of those sections could ruin the entire object. For example, a gargantuan statue of a human might topple over when one of its large legs is reduced to 0 hit points. Objects and damage types. Objects are immune to poison and psychic damage. You might decide that some damage types are more effective against a particular object or substance than others. For example, bludgeoning damage works well for smashing things, but not for cutting through rope or leather. Paper or cloth objects might be vulnerable to fire and lightning. Pick can chip away stone but can't effectively cut down a tree. As always, use your best judgment. As Minecraft taught us, a pick doesn't effectively cut down a tree, I guess. But if you need to, you can just punch it and it's gonna break eventually, right? Right? Damage. Damage threshold. Big objects such as castle walls often have extra resilience represented by a damage threshold. An object with a damage threshold has immunity to all damage unless it takes an amount of damage from a single attack or effect equal to or greater than its damage threshold, in which case it takes damage as normal. Any damage that fails to meet or exceed the object's damage threshold is considered superficial and doesn't reduce the object's hit points. Combat. This section builds on the combat rules in the player's handbook and offers tips for keeping the game running smoothly when a fight breaks out. Tracking initiative. You can use several different methods for keeping track of who goes when in combat. Hidden list. Many DMs keep track of initiative on a list the players can't see, usually a piece of paper behind the DM's screen, or a spreadsheet on a tablet computer. This method allows you to keep track of combatants who haven't been revealed yet, and you can use the initiative list as a place to record the current hit points of monsters, as well as other useful notes. The downside of this approach is that you have to remind the players round after round when their turns come up. Visible list. You can use a whiteboard to track initiative as the players tell you their initiative numbers. Write them on the whiteboard in order from highest to lowest, leaving space between each name. Either write the monster's initiatives on the list at the same time or add them to the list on each monster's first turn. As further improvement, use magnets that you can attach to a metal-based whiteboard with characters and monsters' names written on them, or write those names on cards held in place by magnets. That's like way overdoing it. Who has magnets and a whiteboard? A visible list lets everyone see their order of play. Players know when their turns are coming up and they can start planning their actions in advance. A visible list also removes any uncertainty about when the monsters will act in the fight. A variation on the visible list is to give one player responsibility for keeping track of initiative, either on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper the other players can see. This method reduces the number of things you need to keep track of yourself. Index cards. In this approach, each character gets an index card, as does each group of identical monsters. When the players tell you their initiative numbers, write the numbers on the character's index cards. Do the same when you roll the monster's initiative, then arrange the cards in order from highest to lowest. Starting at the top, you move down through the stack, and you call out the name of the character whose turn it is. Also mention who's next, prompting the player to start thinking ahead. After each character or group of monsters acts, the top card is moved to the bottom of the stack. At first, players don't know the order of play when they use combat cards, and they don't know where the monsters fall into the order until the monsters act. Tracking monsters' hit points. During a combat encounter, you need to track how much damage each monster takes. Most DMs track damage in secret so that their players don't know how many hit points a monster has remaining. Whether you choose to be secretive or not is up to you. What's important is that every monster's hit points be tracked individually. Tracking damage for one or two monsters isn't onerous, but it helps you have a system for larger groups of monsters. If you aren't using miniatures or other visual aids, the easiest way to keep track of your monsters is to assign them unique features. Descriptions such as the ogre with the nasty scar and the ogre with the horned helm help you and your players track which monster is which. For example, imagine that you're running an encounter with 3 ogres, each of which has 59 hit points. Once initiative is rolled, jot down each ogre's hit points and add notes and even a name if you like to differentiate each one. Crag, ogre with a scar, 59. Thod, ogre with a helm, 59. Mer, ogre who smells like poo, 59. If you use miniatures to represent monsters, one easy way to differentiate them is to give each one a unique miniature. If you use identical miniatures to represent multiple monsters, you can tag the miniatures with small stickers of different colors or stickers with different letters or numbers on them. For example, in a combat encounter with 3 ogres, you could use 3 identical ogre miniatures tagged with stickers marked A, B, and C respectively. To track the ogre's hit points, you can sort them by letter, then subtract damage from their hit points as they take it. Your records might look something like this after a few rounds of combat. Ogre A, how do I read that? Ogre A, 59, crossed out, 53 crossed out, 45 crossed out, 24 crossed out, 14 crossed out, 9 crossed out, and dead. Ogre B, 59 crossed out, 51 crossed out, 30. Ogre C, 59. Players often ask how hurt a monster looks. Don't ever feel as though you need to reveal exact hit points, but if a monster is below half its hit point maximum, it's fair to say that it has visible wounds and appears beaten down. You can describe a monster taken to half its hit points as bloodied, giving the players a sense of progress in a fight against a tough opponent and helping them judge when to use their most powerful spells and abilities. That's always an interesting point, how to describe our wounded enemy. Me, usually in the moment, I can't really come up with good descriptors. I'm just gonna say he's wounded, he's bleeding, he seems beaten up. Using and tracking conditions. Various rules and features in the game are clear about when they apply a condition to a creature. You can also apply conditions on the fly. They're meant to be intuitive for you, so do so. For example, if a character is in a state such as sleep that lacks consciousness, you can say the character is unconscious, or did the character just stumble onto the ground? He or she is now prone. Keeping track of conditions can become tricky. For monsters, it's often easiest to track conditions in combat cards. How many monsters do you have to have in a combat so that you have trouble keeping track of conditions? That shouldn't be too difficult. I don't know. Usually I kind of tend to err on the side of having fewer characters in an encounter. Maybe most DMs do have encounters when a bunch of players fight against a horde. I usually don't. Keeping track of conditions can become tricky. For monsters, it's often easiest to track conditions in combat cards, or wherever you track initiative. Players should remember any conditions affecting their characters, because players have incentive to forget or overlook hampering conditions. Character conditions can also be marked on combat cards or whiteboard. You might also try keeping a supply of index cards on hand, marked with conditions and their effects. Then hand the cards to players as the conditions come up. Having a bright pink index card on top of a character sheet can help even the most absent-minded player remember the effects of being charmed or frightened. Monsters and critical hits. A monster follows the same rules for critical hits as a player character. That said, if you use a monster's average damage rather than rolling, you might want how to handle a critical hit. When the monster scores a critical hit, roll all the damage dice associated with the hit and add them to the average damage. For example, if a goblin normally deals 5 or 1d6 plus 2 slashing damage on a hit and scores a critical hit, it deals 5 plus 1d6 slashing damage. Creature size on squares and hexes. Okay, so this is a nice infographic, and this is also a nice infographic. Shows us a tiny, like there's a tiny little thing. There's a small dude, I guess. I'm not sure what it is. It could be a kobold. Is it a kobold? I think I'd like a kobold to be more hunched over, but it does seem to have horns. Anyway, so there's the small dude. There's a medium character that could be a human or an elf. Then there's a large one, who I assume is an ogre. And then there's a huge one, who's a giant, I bet, like a frost giant, perhaps. And then there's this... I don't know what this is. The only thing that comes to mind, this gargantuan thing, is a worm. Like a Magic the Gathering worm, but this is not Magic the Gathering. I don't know what to call it. It looks a bit like a massacre worm from Magic the Gathering. The spine is kind of different, but a bit alike, I guess. Improvising damage. A monster or effect typically specifies the amount of damage it deals. In some cases, though, you need to determine damage on the fly. The improvising damage table gives you suggestions for when you do so. Improvising damage. Dice. Examples. Okay, so this table has a I guess 1d10 on one side, and for example that would be burned by coals, hit by a falling bookcase, pricked by a poison needle. 2d10 would be, for example, being struck by lightning, stumbling into a fire pit. 4d10 would, for example, be being hit by falling rubble in a collapsing tunnel, stumbling into a vat of acid. 10d10 would be, for example, being crushed by compacting walls, hit by whirling steel blades, wading through a lava stream? Are you kidding me? No one can do that and live. To me, that's like not the realm of damage at all. Wading through lava is instant death. 18d10 would, for example, be being submerged in lava, being hit by a crashing flying fortress. That's death territory, it has to be. 24d10 would, for example, be tumbling into a vortex of fire on the elemental plane of fire, being crushed in the jaws of a godlike creature or a moon-sized monster. I bet there are characters who can survive 24d10. I bet there are. The damage severity and level table is a guide to how deadly these damage numbers are for characters of various levels. Cross-reference a character's level with the damage being dealt to gauge the severity of the damage. So I guess this improvising damage table kind of exemplifies one thing that I don't like about Dungeons and Dragons, that it's not very grounded at late levels. At late levels, these people, these adventurers, are basically superheroes, and nothing feels very realistic at that point. I don't really care for these so much larger than life, comic book-esque type of protagonists. But I think I've been plenty vocal about that during this read-along, so let's just leave it at that. The damage severity and level table is a guide to how... Okay, we've read that. Damage severity and level. Character level, 1st to 4th, setback is 1d10. Dangerous is 2d10. Deadly is 4d10. Character levels 5th to 10th. A setback is 2d10. Dangerous is 4d10. Deadly is 10d10. Characters level 11th to 16th. A setback would be 4d10 damage. Dangerous would be 10d10. And 18d10 would be deadly. Characters level 17th to 20th would be 10d10 would be a setback. So wading through lava would be a setback for a 17th to 20th level character. A setback. Ridiculous. 18d10 would be dangerous. Being submerged in lava would be dangerous to them. And 24d10 would be deadly. Damage sufficient to cause a setback rarely poses a risk of death to characters of the level shown, but a severely weakened character might be laid low by this damage. Okay, so a severely weakened character of level 17th would be maybe perhaps endangered by wading through lava, but maybe not. Severely weakened character might be laid low by this damage. In contrast, dangerous damage values pose a significant threat to weaker characters and could potentially kill a character of the level shown if that character is missing many hit points. As the name suggests, deadly damage is enough to drop a character of level shown to 0 hit points. This level of damage can kill even powerful characters outright if they are already wounded. Adjudicating areas of effect. Many spells and other game features create areas of effect, such as the cone and the sphere. If you're not using miniatures or other visual aid, it can sometimes be difficult to determine who's in an area of effect and who isn't. The easiest way to address such uncertainty is to go with your gut and make a call. If you'd like more guidance, consider using the Targets in Area of Effect table. To use the table, imagine which combatants are near one another and let the table guide you in determining the number of those combatants that are caught in an area of effect. Add or subtract targets based on how bunched up potential targets are. Consider rolling 1d3 to determine the amount to add or subtract. I don't like the idea of solving this through a table. I think you will be fine just eyeballing it, winging it, doing it by the ear. Or by the eye, I guess, not by the ear. But let's read the table. Area cone, number of targets, size divided by 10, round up. Cube or square, size divided by 5, round up. Cylinder, radius divided by 5, round up. Line, length divided by 30, round up. Spheral circle radius divided by 5, round up. For example, if a wizard directs Burning Hands, a 15-foot cone, at a nearby group of orcs, you could use a table and say that 2 orcs are targeted. 15 divided by 10 equals 1.5, rounded up to 2. Similarly, a sorcerer could launch a lightning bolt 100-foot line at some ogres and hobgoblins, and he could use the table to say 4 of the monsters are targeted, because 100 divided by 30 is 3.33 rounded up to 4. This approach aims at simplicity instead of spatial precision. If you prefer more tactical nuance, consider using miniatures. If this aims for simplicity, I don't know what to tell you. I guess using a mini would be much simpler to me, or even just saying a number, imagining the cone in your head and seeing how many of this would fit, and just give the player that amount. Whatever. You could make something up, you could lie. You're the DM, you get to make things up and lie. Handling mobs. Keeping combat moving along at a brisk pace can be difficult when there are dozens of monsters involved in a battle. When handling a crowded battlefield, you can speed up play by foregoing attack rolls in favor of approximating the average number of hits a large group of monsters can inflict on a target. Okay, so this is probably useful for a swarm of rats or a bunch of angry peasants during a riot. Yeah, I kinda like these sort of shorthands. They come in handy for when you want to do something that fits the narrative but doesn't really lend itself to combat done traditionally. Instead of rolling an attack roll, determine the minimum d20 roll a creature needs in order to hit a target by subtracting its attack bonus from the target's AC. You will need to refer to the result throughout the battle, so it's best to write it down. Okay, I'm with you so far. Look up the minimum d20 roll needed on the mob attacks table. The table shows how many creatures that need that die roll or higher must attack a target in order for one of them to hit. If that many creatures attack the target, their combined efforts result in one of them hitting the target. For example, 8 orcs surround a fighter. The orcs' attack bonus is +5 and the fighter's AC is 19. The orcs need a 14 or higher to hit the fighter. According to the table, for every 3 orcs that attack the fighter, one of them hits. There are enough orcs for 2 groups of 3. The remaining 2 orcs fail to hit the fighter. If the attacking creatures deal different amounts of damage, assume that the creature that deals the most damage is the one that hits. If the creature that hits has multiple attacks with the same attack bonus, assume that it hits once with each of those attacks. If a creature's attacks have different attack bonuses, resolve each attack separately. This attack resolution system ignores critical hits in favor of reducing the number of die rolls. As the number of combatants dwindles, switch back to using individual die rolls to avoid situations where one side can't possibly hit the other. Okay, I guess it makes sense. And we have a little table here. Mob attacks, d20 roll needed. Attackers needed for 1 to hit. Okay, so how do I read this? If we roll 1 to 5 on a d20... Okay, no. If we don't roll on this table. If we have the type of monster that requires between 1 and 5 to hit the player, it takes just a single attacker for 1 hit. If you need between 6 and 12 on a die roll for a mob to hit, it takes 2 attackers. If you have to roll between 13 and 14, it takes 3 attackers to hit. If you have to roll between 15 and 16, you need 4 mobs to hit. If you have to roll between 17 and 18 to hit, it takes 5 attackers to hit. If you have to roll a 19 to hit, it takes 10 attackers to hit. And if you need to roll a 20, it takes 20 attackers to hit. I guess it's just a shorthand. It's just percentage, right? Is it? Yeah, it is. It kind of is, yeah. Using miniatures in combat, players can often rely on your descriptions to visualize where the characters are in relation to their surroundings and their enemies. So by the way, if you have a beautiful mind and you can do maths very fast in your head, you don't really need that table. You can just calculate. The probability isn't like that entirely, I guess. But you could statistically calculate it every time and without the table. It's just a shorthand. Let's drop it. Using miniatures. In combat, players can often rely on the descriptions to visualize where their characters are in relation to their surroundings and their enemies. Some complex battles, however, are easier to run with visual aids, the most common of which are miniatures and a grid. If you like to construct model terrain, build 3-dimensional dungeons, or draw maps on large vinyl mats, you should also consider using miniatures. The Player's Handbook offers simple rules for depicting combat using miniature figures on a grid. This section expands on the material. Tactical maps. You can draw tactical maps with colored markers on wet erased vinyl mat with 1-inch squares on a large sheet of paper or on a similar flat surface. Pre-printed poster-sized maps, maps assembled from cardboard tiles, and terrain made of sculpted plaster or resin are also fun. The most common unit for tactical maps is the 5-foot square, and maps with grids are readily available and easy to create. However, you don't have to use a grid at all. You can track distances with a tape measure, string craft sticks, or pipe cleaners cut to specific lengths. Another option is a play surface covered by 1-inch hexagons, often called hexes, which combines the easy counting of a grid with the more flexible movement using no grid. Dungeon corridors with straight walls and right angles don't map easily onto hexes though. Like, none of this is really necessary. You could just use a sheet of paper and sketch an ugly and imprecise representation of what the characters are located like. What's the layout, right? You could just sketch a little layout and erase something every time, or just talk about it to your players. You don't need to be very precise about it. And it's still gonna be a visual aid. It'll be fine. We used to do it with just paper and ugly drawings, and it worked alright for us. Don't worry too much about the representation or the minis or being accurate with space. Creature size on squares and hexes. Now, creature size determines how much space it occupies on squares or hexes, as shown in the creature size and space table. If the miniature you use for a monster takes up an amount of space different from what's on the table, that's fine, but treat the monster as its official size for all other rules. For example, you might use a miniature that has a large base to represent a huge giant. A giant takes up less space on the battlefield than its size suggests, but it's still huge for the purposes of rules like grappling. Creature size and space. Size tiny. Space squares 4 per square. Space hexes 4 per hex. Creature size small 1 square or 1 hex. Creature size medium 1 square for 1 hex. Creature size large 4 squares 2 by 2 or 3 hexes. Creature size huge 9 squares 3 by 3 or 7 hexes. Creature size gargantuan 16 squares 4 by 4 or more, or 12 hexes or more. So I guess that's what it looks like. This is what it looks like, I guess. No, this is flanking, half cover and 3/4. That's like a large creature or a huge one. Yeah, that's a large creature. Then that's like a normal creature. And you can probably imagine for example, a huge creature being 7 hexes. So like this whole thing would be huge if you added the flanking hexes here. It would be huge. Anyway, optional rule, diagonals. The player's handbook presents a simple method for counting movement and measuring range on the grid. Count every square as 5 feet, even if you're moving diagonally. Though this is fast in play, it breaks the laws of geometry and is inaccurate over long distances. This optional rule provides more realism, but requires more effort during combat. When measuring range or moving diagonally on a grid, the first diagonal square counts as 5 feet, but the second diagonal square counts as 10 feet. This pattern of 5 feet and 10 feet continues whenever you're counting diagonally, even if you move horizontally or vertically between different bits of diagonal movement. For example, a character might move 1 square diagonally 5 feet, then 3 squares straight 15 feet, and then another square diagonally 10 feet for a total movement of 30 feet. Optional rule, facing. If you want the precision of knowing which way a character is facing, consider using this optional rule. Whenever a creature ends its move, it can change its facing. Each creature has a front arc, the direction it faces, left and right side arcs, and rear arc. A creature can also change its facing as a reaction when any other creature moves. A creature can normally target only creatures in its front or side arcs. It can't see into its rear arc. This means an attacker in the creature's rear arc makes attacks against it with advantage. This gets pretty complicated if you have to track it, especially without minis. If you have to track it without minis, it gets really complicated. So I think that Dungeons & Dragons, as it is, without any optional or added rules, is a pretty complex system. And I don't feel like you need extra rules for this sort of thing. I'd just be content with having the baseline and maybe even trimming some things. I don't know, I'm not gonna trim things when I play first time. I'll try not to trim things, but I'm not gonna use most of the optional rules that complicate stuff. A creature can normally target only creatures in its front or side arcs. It can't see into its rear arc. This means an attacker in the creature's rear arc makes attack rolls against it with advantage. Shields apply their bonus to AC only against attacks from the front arc or the same side arc as the shield. See, then you have to actually differentiate between armor classes from different hits depending on where the hit's coming from. That's complicated. For example, a fighter with a shield on the left arm can use it only against attacks from the front and left arcs. Feel free to determine that not all creatures have every type of arc. For example, An amorphous ochre jelly could treat all of its arcs as front ones, while a hydra might have 3 front arcs and 1 rear one. On squares, you pick one side of the creature's space as the direction it is facing. Draw a diagonal line outward from each corner of the side to determine the squares in its front arc. The opposite sides of the space determine its rear arc in the same way. The remaining spaces on either side of the creature form its side arcs. On hexes, determining the front, rear, and side arcs requires more judgment. Pick one side of the creature's space and create a wedge shape extending out from there for the front arc and another on the opposite side of the creature for the rear arc. The remaining spaces to either side of the creature are its side arcs. A square or hex might be in more than one arc, depending on how you draw the lines from a creature's space. If more than half of a square or hex lies in one arc, it is in that arc. If it is split exactly down the middle, use this rule. If half of it lies in the front arc, it's in that arc. If half of it is in a side arc and the rear arc, it is in the side arc. I don't feel like any of this adds fun or immersion to the game. I mean, it might add realism, but realism without immersion, because you get to just track more things and it's gonna take you out of the game rather than put you more into the moment. Because see, tracking these placements very strictly and remembering whether or not the attacker that's attacking a certain character is from the shield side or not, it doesn't put you in the situation of heated combat. The downside you get from slowing down in your game is a much bigger downside than the upside you get from getting that extra bit of realism, in my opinion. So I recommend against using these optional rules. Adjudicating reaction timing. Typical combat zones rely on the opportunity attack and the ready action for most of the reactions in a fight. Various spells and features give a creature more reaction options, and sometimes the timing of reaction can be difficult to adjudicate. Use this rule of thumb. Follow whatever timing is specified in the creature's description. For example, the opportunity attack and the shield spell are clear about the fact that they can interrupt their triggers. If a reaction has no timing specified, or the timing is unclear, the reaction occurs after its trigger finishes, as in the ready action. Okay, so the important part is, if a reaction has no timing specified, or the timing is unclear, the reaction occurs after its trigger finishes, as in the ready action. This comes up a lot, adjudicating reaction timing. This comes up a lot. I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons too long as a player, and not at all as a DM, but I've already seen situations where that sort of thing matters and comes up. So it's good to remember that one. Anyway, chases. Strict application of the movement rules can turn a potentially exciting chase into a dull, predictable affair. Faster creatures can catch up to slower ones, while creatures with the same speed never close the distance between each other. This set of rules can make chases more exciting by introducing random elements. Beginning a chase. A chase requires a quarry and at least one pursuer. Any participants not already in initiative order must roll initiative. As in combat, each participant in the chase can take one action and move on its turn. The chase ends when one side drops out or the quarry escapes. When a chase begins, determine the starting distance between the quarry and the pursuers, track the distance between them, and designate the pursuer closest to the quarry as the lead. The lead pursuer might change from round to round. Running the chase. Participants in the chase are strongly motivated to use the dash action every round. Pursuers who stop to cast spells and make attacks run the risk of losing their quarry, and a quarry that does so is likely to be caught. Dashing. During the chase, a participant can freely use the dash action a number of times equal to 3 plus its constitution modifier. Each additional dash action it takes during the chase requires the creature to succeed on a DC 10 constitution check at the end of its turn or gain 1 level of exhaustion. Oh, so this is basically a combination of measuring speeds and a sudden death, depending on constitution. I call it sudden death because of a video game mechanic, I guess. It's not death, it's basically you're gonna run out of the ability to use your dash action eventually if your constitution is low. It adds a little bit of complexity because you have to still do it, alright? It's not just movement in combat, but it will stop a chase from lasting forever and feeling ridiculous. Each additional dash action it takes during the chase requires the creature to succeed on a DC 10 constitution check at the end of its turn or gain 1 level of exhaustion. A participant drops out of the chase if its exhaustion reaches level 5, since its speed becomes 0. The creature can remove the levels of exhaustion it gained during the chase by finishing a short or long rest. Spells and attacks. A chase participant can make attacks and cast spells against other creatures within range. Apply the normal rules for cover, terrain, and so on to the attacks and spells. Chase participants can't normally make opportunity attacks against each other since they're all assumed to be moving in the same direction at the same time. However, participants can still be targets of opportunity attacks from creatures not participating in the chase. For example, adventurers who chase a thief past a gang of thugs in an alley might provoke opportunity attacks from the thugs, ending a chase. Chase ends when one side or the other stops, when the quarry escapes or when the pursuers are close enough to their quarry to catch it. If neither side gives up the chase, the quarry makes the dexterity stealth check at the end of each round. After every participant in the chase has taken his turn, the result is compared to the passive wisdom perception scores of the pursuers. If the quarry consists of multiple creatures, they all make the check. If the quarry is never out of the lead pursuer's sight, the check fails automatically. Otherwise, if the result of the quarry's check is greater than the highest passive score, that quarry escapes. If not, the chase continues for another round. The quarry gains advantage or disadvantage on its check based on the prevailing circumstances, as shown in the escape factors table. If one or more factors give the quarry both advantage and disadvantage on its check, the quarry has neither, as usual. This is kind of interesting as an alternative to combat, having a chase, because it has a similar amount of rules, maybe slightly less because there really aren't too many chase related spells and these sort of things, but to the players who like rolling a bunch of dice and seeing if their character can do well mechanically, this should be an interesting distraction, I guess. Escape factors. Factor. Quarry has many things to hide behind. Check has advantage. Quarry is in a very crowded or noisy area. Check has advantage. Quarry has few things to hide behind. Check has disadvantage. Quarry is in an undercrowded or quiet area. Check has disadvantage. The lead pursuer is a ranger or has proficiency in survival. Check has disadvantage. Other factors might help or hinder the quarry's ability to escape at your discretion. For example, a quarry with fairy fire spell cast on it might have disadvantage on checks made to escape because it's much easier to spot. Escape doesn't necessarily mean the quarry has outpaced its pursuers. For example, in an urban setting, escape might mean the quarry ducked into a crowd or slipped around the corner, leaving no clue as to where it went. Chase complications. As with any good chase scene, complications can arise to make a chase more pulse-pounding. The Urban Chase Complications table and the Wilderness Chase Complications table provide several examples. Chase rolls a d20 at the end of its turn and stop the appropriate table to determine whether a complication occurs. If it does, it affects the next chase participant in the initiative order, not the participant who rolled the die. The participant who rolled the die or the participant affected by the complication can spend inspiration to negate the complication. I don't like this part necessarily because it involves players rolling and players perhaps using inspiration to negate complications, and they'd have to know the rules of the chase, right? And I wouldn't want to explain the rules of the chase to players and making sure they understand them to be able to participate in the chase, because it's its very own thing. It's not in the player's handbook. Usually most things you can do like this, you can do without the players strictly knowing the rules. You just make the rules yourself and you describe to the players the changes in the world. But this, like using inspiration to negate this, it wouldn't slide. They'd have to know what's happening, what they're rolling for, and what could happen if they roll poorly or if the complication happens. It's like the first thing I don't like in this whole chase system. I guess it could be fixed. Okay, so characters can create their own complications to shake off pursuers. For example, casting the web spell in a narrow alleyway. Adjudicate these as you see fit. Urban Chase Complications, d20. That's a table where we roll a d20, and on a 1, a large obstacle such as a horse or cart blocks your way. Make a DC 15 Dexterity Acrobatics check to get past the obstacle. On a failed check, the obstacle counts as 10 feet of difficult terrain. 2. A crowd blocks your way. Make a DC 10 Strength Athletics or Dexterity Acrobatics check, your choice, to make your way through the crowd unimpeded. On a failed check, the crowd counts as 10 feet of difficult terrain. A large stained glass window or similar barrier blocks your path. Make a DC 10 Strength saving throw to smash through the barrier and keep going. On a failed save, you bounce off the barrier and fall prone. A maze of barrels, crates, and similar obstacles stands in your way. Make a DC 10 Dexterity Acrobatics or Intelligence check, your choice, to navigate the maze. On a failed check, the maze counts as 10 feet of difficult terrain. I feel kind of like mixing the rules for difficult terrain into this. Sketchy. because I, off the top of my head, do not remember rules for difficult terrain. I feel like a lot of players are in the same boat. They would probably not remember rules for difficult terrain, and this is plenty packed with various rules. We mentioned being prone. I have to know what prone does. You get the idea. You get the idea. Number 5. If we roll number 5, the ground beneath your feet is slippery with rain, spilled oil, or some other liquid. Make a DC 10 dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, you fall prone. 6. You come upon a pack of dogs fighting over food. Make a DC 10 dexterity acrobatics check to get through the pack unimpeded. On a failed check, you are bitten and take 1d4 piercing damage, and the dogs count as 5 feet of difficult terrain. 7. You run and brawl in progress. Make a DC 15 strength athletics, dexterity, acrobatics, or charisma intimidation check, your choice, to get past the brawlers unimpeded. On a failed check, you take 2d4 bludgeoning damage, and the brawlers count as 10 feet of difficult terrain. 8. A beggar blocks your way. Make a DC 10 strength athletics, dexterity, acrobatics, or charisma intimidation check, your choice, to slip past the beggar. You succeed automatically if you toss the beggar a coin. On a failed check, the beggar counts as 5 feet of difficult terrain. 9. An overzealous guard, see the monster manual for game statistics, mistakes you for someone else. If you move 20 feet or more on your turn, the guard makes an opportunity attack against you with a spear, +3 to hit, 1d6 +1 piercing damage on a hit. 10. You are forced to make a sharp turn to avoid colliding with something impassable. Make a DC 10 dexterity saving throw to navigate the turn. On a failed save, you collide with something hard. Take 1d4 bludgeoning damage. And between 11 and 20, there is no complication. Wilderness chase complications. It's another roll of d20, and on a 1, your path takes you through a rough patch of brush. Make a DC 10 strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics check, your choice, to get past the brush. On a failed check, the brush counts as 5 feet of difficult terrain. On a 2, uneven ground threatens to slow your progress. Make a DC 10 dexterity acrobatics check to navigate the area. On a failed check, the ground counts as 10 feet of difficult terrain. 3. You run through a swarm of insects. See the monster manual for game statistics, with the DM choosing whichever kind of insects makes the most sense. The swarm makes an opportunity attack against you, +3 to hit, 4d4 piercing damage on a hit. On a 4, a stream, ravine, or rock bed blocks your path. Make a DC 10 strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics check, your choice, to cross the impediment. On a failed check, the impediment counts as 10 feet of difficult terrain. On a 5, make a DC 10 constitution saving throw. On a failed save, you are blinded by blowing sand, dirt, ash, snow, or pollen until the end of your turn. While blinded this way, your speed is halved. On a 6, a sudden drop catches you by surprise. Make a DC 10 dexterity saving throw to navigate the impediment. On a failed save, you fall 1d4 times 5 feet, taking 1d6 bludgeoning damage per 10 feet, fallen as normal, and land prone. 7. You blunder into a hunter's snare. Make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw to avoid it. On a failed save, you are caught in a net and restrained. See Chapter 5 Equipment of the Player's Handbook for rules on escaping a net. On an 8, you are caught in a stampede of spooked animals. Make a DC 10 dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, you are knocked about and take 1d4 bludgeoning damage and 1d4 piercing damage. On a 9, your path takes you near a patch of razzle vine. Make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw, or use 10 feet of movement, your choice, to avoid the razzle vine. On a failed save, you take 1d10 slashing damage. 10. A creature indigenous to the area chases after you. The DM chooses a creature appropriate for the terrain. 11 to 20, no complication. Designing your own chase tables. The tables presented here don't work for all possible environments. A chase through the sewers of Baldur's Gate, or through the spiderweb-filled alleys of Metzoberanzan, might inspire you to create your own table. No, it's not. It's Metzoberanzan. It's double R, not the double Z. Metzoberanzan, I guess. Whatever. It's a made-up word anyway. Creatures being chased can split up into smaller groups. This tactic forces pursuers to either divide their forces or allow some of the quarry to escape. If a pursuit splits into several smaller chases, resolve each chase separately. Run a round of one chase, then a round of the next, and so on, tracking the distance for each separate group. Mapping the chase. If you have the opportunity to plan out a chase, Take the time to draw a rough map that shows the route. Insert obstacles at specific points, especially ones that require the characters to make ability checks or saving throws to avoid slowing or stopping, or use a random table of complications similar to the ones in this section. Otherwise, improvise as you play. Complications can be barriers to progress or opportunities for mayhem. Characters being chased through a forest by bugbears might spot a wasp nest and slow down long enough to attack the nest or throw rocks at it, thus creating an obstacle for the pursuers. A map of a chase can be linear or have many branches, depending on the nature of the chase. For example, a minecart chase might have few if any branches, while a sewer chase might have several. Role reversal. During a chase, it's possible for the pursuers to become the quarry. For example, characters chasing a thief through a marketplace might draw unwanted attention from other members of the Thieves Guild. As they pursue the fleeing thief, they must also evade the thieves from pursuing them. Roll initiative for the new arrivals and run both chases simultaneously. In another scenario, the fleeing thief might run into the waiting arms of his accomplices. The outnumbered characters might decide to flee with the thieves in pursuit. I like the second scenario, it's interesting. I'd be tempted to do a chase like that. Siege equipment. Okay, so this is completely different, I guess. Yeah, we're largely done with chases. Let's get to siege equipment. Siege equipment. Siege weapons are designed to assail castles and other walled fortifications. They see much use in campaigns that feature war. Most siege weapons don't move around a battlefield on their own. They require creatures to move them as well as to load, aim and fire them. A ballista. It's a large object. It has armor class of 15. It has 50 hit points. It's immune to poison and psychic damage. A ballista is a massive crossbow that fires heavy bolts. Before it can be fired, it must be loaded and aimed. It takes one action to load the weapon, one action to aim it, and one action to fire it. Bolt. Ranged weapon attack. Plus 6 to hit. Range 120 to 480 feet. One target. Hit. 16 or 3d10 piercing damage. That's ridiculously low. This sort of pathetic damage, imagine your character or like a mid-level character taking a hit from a ballista and not even being close to death. There's no risk that the ballista can kill you in one shot. It's kind of weird. A cannon. Large, or let's see if a strong character can easily survive a shot from a cannon. Knowing D&D, I bet they can, but I'm not sure I approve. Cannon is a large object with an armor class of 19, 75 hit points, immunity to poison and psychic damage. A cannon uses gunpowder to propel heavy balls of cast iron through the air at destructive speeds. In a campaign without gunpowder, a cannon might be an arcane device built by clever gnomes or wizardly engineers. A cannon is usually supported in a wooden frame with wheels. Before it can be fired, the cannon must be loaded and aimed. It takes one action to load the cannon, one action to aim it, and one action to fire it. Cannonball, ranged at weapon attack, plus 6 to hit, range 600 medium and 2400 feet long. One target. Hit 8d10 or 44 bludgeoning damage. Like a level 1 character would die from a cannonball hit every time, which makes sense, but in my mind, like any person being hit with a cannonball, a normal person being hit with a cannonball, no matter how much experience they have in crawling through dungeons, they're gonna die. But what do I know? What do I know? Cauldron. Suspended. Armor class 19. Hit points 20. Damage immunities. Poison and psychic. A cauldron is an iron pot suspended so that it can be tipped easily, spilling its contents. Once empty, the cauldron must be refilled and its contents must usually be reheated before it can be used again. It takes 3 actions to fill a cauldron and 1 action to tip it. Cauldrons can be filled with other liquids, such as acid or green slime, with different effects. Boiling oil. The cauldron pours boiling oil onto a 10-foot square area directly below it. Any creature in the area must make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw, taking 10 or 3d6 fire damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Mangonel. Large object. Armor class 15. Hit points 100. Damage immunities. Poison and psychic. A mangonel is a type of catapult that hurls heavy projectiles in a high arc. This payload can hit targets behind cover. Before the mangonel can be fired, it must be loaded and aimed, It takes 2 actions to load the weapon, 2 actions to aim it, and 1 action to fire it. The mangonel typically hurls a heavy stone, although it can hurl other kinds of projectiles with different effects. Mangonel stone ranged weapon attack +5 to hit, ranged between 200 and 800 feet. Can't hit targets within 60 feet of it. 1 target. Hit 27 or 5d10 bludgeoning damage. And when I read the ranges, basically the slash means that the first number is normal range, and the second one is maximum range. And at maximum range, if I recall correctly, you just get disadvantage. You get disadvantage, right? Maximum range? I don't know. Ram. Large object. Armor class 15. Hit points 100. Damage immunities, poison, psychic. A ram consists of a movable galley equipped with a heavy log suspended from 2 roof beams by chains. The log is shod in iron and used to butter through doors and barricades. It takes a minimum of 4 medium creatures to operate a ram. Because of the gallery roof, these operators have a total cover against attacks from above. Ram. Melee weapon, attack +8 to hit, reach 5 feet, 1 object, hit 16 or 3d10 bludgeoning damage. Pretty underwhelming. Siege tower. Gargantuan object, armor class 15, hit points 200, damage immunities, poison, and psychic. A siege tower is a mobile wooden structure with a beam frame and slats in its walls. I don't know what slats are, but it has them in its walls apparently. Large wooden wheels or rollers allow the tower to be pushed or pulled by soldiers or beasts of burden. Medium or smaller creatures can use the siege tower to reach the top of walls up to 40 feet high. A creature in the tower has a total cover from attacks outside the tower. Trebuchet. Huge object. Armor class 15. Hit points 150. Damage immunities, poison, and psychic. A trebuchet is a powerful catapult that throws its payload in a high arc so it can hit targets behind cover. Before a trebuchet can be fired, it must be loaded and aimed. It takes 2 actions to load the weapon, 2 actions to aim it, and 1 action to fire it. A trebuchet typically holds a heavy stone. However, it can launch other kinds of projectiles such as barrels of oil or sewage with different effects. A trebuchet stone, ranged weapon attack, +5 to hit, range, normal 300, 1200 feet maximum range. Can't hit targets within 60 feet of it. 1 target. Hit 44 or 8d10 bludgeoning damage. Diseases. Okay, so we're done with siege machines, and now other joys of war such as plague. Diseases. A plague ravages the kingdom, setting the adventurers on a quest to find a cure. An adventurer emerges from an ancient tomb, unopened for centuries, and soon finds herself suffering from a wasting illness. A warlock offends some dark power and contracts this strange affliction that spreads whenever he casts spells. A simple outbreak might amount to little more than a small drain on party resources, curable by casting a lesser restoration. A more complicated outbreak can form the basis of 1 or more adventures as characters search for a cure, stop the spread of the disease, and deal with the consequences. A disease that does more than infect a few party members is primarily a plot device. The rules help describe the effects of the disease and how it can be cured, but the specifics of how a disease works aren't bound by a common set of rules. Diseases can affect any creature, and a given illness might or might not pass from one race or kind of creature to another. A plague might affect only constructs or undead, or sweep through a halfling neighborhood but leave other races untouched. What matters is the story you want to tell. Usually I'd say this is an interesting thing you can put in your campaign. However, given the times, some people might not want to have a disease as a twist in the campaign. Feel kind of too real. I don't mind necessarily. Personally, I don't mind that sort of thing. I don't mind campaigns or stories or games that touch on real life stuff that's happening as the game is running. But I know that some people play the game to kind of let go of what's happening in their lives, what's covered in the media, the troubles of the world they live in. They might not enjoy a disease in a campaign that's being run as a real life disease as a problem in the world. So maybe not. Anyway, sample diseases. The diseases here illustrate the variety of ways disease can work in the game. Feel free to alter the saving throw, DCs, incubation times, symptoms and other characteristics of these diseases to suit your campaign. Cackle fever. This disease targets humanoids, although gnomes are strangely immune. When in the grips of this disease, victims frequently succumb to fits of mad laughter, giving the disease its common name and its morbid nickname, the shrieks. Symptoms manifest 1d4 hours after infection and include fever and disorientation. The infected creature gains 1 level of exhaustion but can't be removed until the disease is cured. Any event that causes the infected creature great stress, including entering combat, taking damage, experiencing fear, or having a nightmare, forces the creature to make a DC 13 Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 5 or 1d10 psychic damage and becomes incapacitated with mad laughter for 1 minute. The creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the mad laughter and the incapacitated condition on a success. Any humanoid creature that starts its turn within 10 feet of an infected creature in the throes of mad laughter must succeed on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or also become infected with the disease. Once the creature succeeds on this save, it is immune to the mad laughter of that particular infected creature for 24 hours. At the end of each long rest, an infected creature can make a DC 13 Constitution saving throw. On a successful save, the DC for this save and for the save to avoid an attack of mad laughter drops by 1d6. When the saving throw DC drops to 0, the creature recovers from the disease. A creature that fails 3 of these saving throws gains a randomly determined form of indefinite madness, as described later in this chapter. Sewer plague. Sewer plague is a generic term for a broad category of illnesses that incubate in sewers, refuse heaps, and stagnant swamps, and which is sometimes transmitted by creatures that dwell in these areas, such as rats and otyughs. When a humanoid creature is bitten by a creature that carries the disease, or when it comes into contact with filth or offal contaminated by the disease, the creature must succeed on a DC 11 Constitution saving throw or become infected. It takes 1d4 days for sewer plague symptoms to manifest in an infected creature. Symptoms include fatigue and cramps. The infected creature suffers 1 level of exhaustion and regains only half the normal number of hit points from spending hit dice and no hit points from finishing a long rest. At the end of each long rest, an infected creature must make a DC 11 Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the character gains 1 level of exhaustion. On a successful save, the character's exhaustion level decreases by 1 level. If a successful saving throw reduces the infected creature's level of exhaustion below 1, the creature recovers from the disease. Sight rot. This painful infection causes bleeding from the eyes and eventually blinds the victim. Beast or humanoid that drinks water tainted by sight rot must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or become infected. 1 day after infection, the creature's vision starts to become blurry. The creature takes -1 penalty to attack rolls and ability checks that rely on sight. At the end of each long rest after the symptoms appear, the penalty worsens by 1. When it reaches -5, the victim is blinded until its sight is restored by magic, such as lesser restoration or heal. Sight rot can be cured using a rare flower called eyebright, which grows in some swamps. Given an hour, a character who has proficiency with an herbalist kit can turn the flower into 1 dose of ointment. Applied to the eyes before a long rest, 1 dose of it prevents the disease from worsening after the rest. After 3 doses, the ointment cures the disease entirely. Poisons. Given their insidious and deadly nature, poisons are illegal in most societies, but a favored tool among assassins, drow, and other evil creatures. Poisons can come in the following 4 types. Contact. The creature that touches contact poison with exposed skin suffers its effects. Ingested. A creature must swallow an entire dose of ingested poison to suffer its effects. You might decide that a partial dose has a reduced effect, such as allowing advantage on the saving throw, or dealing only half damage on a failed save. Inhaled. These poisons are powders or gases that take effect when they are inhaled. A single dose fills a 5-foot cube. Injury. A creature that takes slashing or piercing damage from a weapon or piece of ammunition coated with injury poison is exposed to its effects. Poisons. Oh, that's a lot. They have names too. Assassin's Blood is ingested and it costs 150 gold pieces. Burnt author fumes are inhaled and cost 500 gold pieces. Carrion crawler mucus is contact, I guess, and it costs 200 gold pieces. Drow poison is injury based and costs 200 pieces. Essence of ether is inhaled and costs 300 pieces. Malice is inhaled and costs 250 pieces. Midnight tears are ingested and they cost 1500 gold pieces. That's a lot. Oil of target is contact based and costs 400 gold pieces. Pale tincture is ingested and costs 250 gold pieces. Purple worm poison, injury based and costs 2000 gold pieces. That's a lot. Serpent venom is injury based and costs 200 pieces. Torpor is ingested and costs 600 gold pieces. Truth serum is ingested and costs 150 gold pieces. That's very cheap for something as powerful as the truth serum. I wonder if it works in Dungeons and Dragons. In reality, all the truth serums, they don't really strictly work as you would expect from the name. You just loosen up the person, but there's no guarantee that they're gonna be truthful. Wyvern poison, injury based, 1200 gold pieces. So if you could sell them as a character, if you could get them from wyverns for example and sell them, that would be very good business. Because a wyvern isn't that hard of a mob to kill. If I remember correctly, for a mid-level adventurer, in Baldur's Gate 1 you could kill wyverns quite easily by the end of the game. And you didn't get to a very high level in Baldur's Gate 1, and I assume that between editions, wyverns didn't change so much. Sample poisons. Each type of poison has its own debilitating effects. Assassin's blood is ingested. A creature subjected to this poison must make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw. On a failed save it takes 6 or 1d12 poison damage and is poisoned for 24 hours. On a successful save, the creature takes half damage and isn't poisoned. Burnt author fumes. They're inhaled. A creature subjected to this poison must succeed on a DC 13 Constitution saving throw, will take 10 or 3d6 poison damage and must repeat the saving throw at the start of each of its turns. On each failed save, the character takes 3 or 1d6 poison damage. After 3 successful saves, the poison ends. Carrion crawler mucus. I bet this is gonna paralyze. I bet, because of the Infinity Engine games, carrion crawlers would paralyze. So we'll see if I'm right. Carrion crawler mucus contact. This poison must be harvested from a dead or incapacitated carrion crawler. A creature subject to this poison must succeed on a DC 13 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned for 1 minute. The poisoned creature is paralyzed, see, told ya. The creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. This is, by the way, very dangerous if you have few characters, because if you had, for example, 2 characters and they got unlucky and became paralyzed at the same time, that's a kill, I think. But if you have more characters, it's much less likely for them to become paralyzed in a way where the entire party can't do anything. The unparalyzed people can't protect the paralyzed people, that sort of deal. Drow poison, injury based. This poison is typically made only by the drow and only in a place far removed from sunlight. A creature subjected to this poison must succeed on DC 13 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned for 1 hour. If the saving throw fails by 5 or more, the creature is also unconscious while poisoned in this way. The creature wakes up if it takes damage or if another creature takes an action to shake it awake. It doesn't even deal damage. It poisons the person and makes them unconscious. I mean, it's not too bad. Essence of ether, inhaled. A creature subjected to this poison must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or become poisoned for 8 hours. The poisoned creature is unconscious. The creature wakes up if it takes damage or if another creature takes an action to shake it awake. Malice, inhaled. A creature subjected to this poison must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or become poisoned for 1 hour. The poisoned creature is blinded. Midnight tears, ingested. A creature that ingests this poison suffers no effect until the stroke of midnight if the poison has not been neutralized before then. The creature must succeed on a DC 17 Constitution saving throw, taking 31 or 9d6 poison damage on a failed save or half as much damage on a successful one. Oil of Target, contact based. The creature subject to this poison must succeed on a DC 13 Constitution saving throw or become poisoned for 24 hours. The poisoned creature is unconscious. The creature wakes up if it takes damage. Pale tincture, ingested. A creature subjected to this poison must succeed on a DC 16 saving throw, Constitution saving throw, or take 3 or 1d6 poison damage and become poisoned. The poisoned creature must repeat the saving throw every 24 hours, taking 3 or 1d6 poison damage on a failed save. Until this poison ends, the damage the poison deals can't be healed by any means. After 7 successful saving throws, the effect ends and the creature can heal normally. Purple worm poison, that one was expensive. It's injury based. This poison must be harvested from a dead or incapacitated purple worm. The creature subject to this poison must make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw, taking 42 or 12d6 poison damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Imagine having a rogue with a blade coated with this thing. I wonder if critical hits apply to poison. No, I guess they don't. But still, an extra 12d6 on top of sneak attack, that's a lot of damage. Serpent venom, injury based. This poison must be harvested from a dead or incapacitated giant poisonous snake. A creature subject to this poison must succeed on a DC 11 Constitution saving throw, taking 10 or 3d6 poison damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Torpor. Ingested. A creature subject to this poison must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, or become poisoned for 4d6 hours. The poison creature is incapacitated. Truth Serum. Ingested. A creature subject to this poison must succeed on a DC 11 Constitution saving throw or become poisoned for 1 hour. The poison creature can't knowingly speak a lie as if under the effect of a Zone of Truth spell. So I guess this is much more dependable than the real life Truth Serum. It's magic, but the DC is pretty low. It's pretty easy to shake off the Truth Serum. Wyvern poison. Injury based. This poison must be harvested from a dead or incapacitated wyvern. A creature subject to this poison must make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, taking 24 or 7d6 poison damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. So either wyverns are much stronger in this edition than they were in 2nd edition, or this poison doesn't pack as much of a punch when it's on a wyvern. Either way, let's go to purchasing poison. Purchasing poison. In some settings, strict laws prohibit the possession and use of poison, but a black market dealer or unscrupulous apothecary might keep a hidden stash. Characters with criminal contacts might be able to acquire poison relatively easy. Other characters might have to make extensive inquiries and pay bribes before they can track down the poisons they seek. The poisons table gives suggested prices for single doses of various poisons. Crafting and harvesting poison. During downtime between adventures, a character can use the crafting rules in the player's handbook to create a basic poison. If the character has proficiency with a poisoner's kit, at your discretion the character can craft other kinds of poison. Not all poison ingredients are available for purchase, and tracking down certain ingredients might form the basis of an entire adventure. A character can instead attempt to harvest poison from a poisonous creature such as a snake, a wyvern, a carrion crawler. The creature must be incapacitated or dead, and the harvesting requires 1d6 minutes, followed by a DC 20 intelligence nature check. Proficiency with the poisonous kit applies to this check if the character doesn't have proficiency in nature. On a successful check, the character harvests enough poison for a single dose. On a failed check, the character is unable to extract any poison. If the character fails the check by 5 or more, the character is subjected to the creature's poison. I guess in real life it's much easier to make a deadly poison, especially the kind that kills you by being imbibed. I don't mean to brag, but I could easily make an absolutely lethal poison by just going out into a forest and picking certain mushrooms, or like finding some monkshood in a person's garden. You'd be surprised how many horrifically poisonous plants and mushrooms you can find in real life. You've probably seen an insanely poisonous plant in someone's garden a bazillion times already, and if you're not very interested in this sort of thing, you wouldn't know. There's many poisonous plants easily available. I'm not giving ideas, by the way, no. We do not encourage creating poisons in real life on this stream, as I am legally required to tell you. Madness. In a typical campaign, characters aren't driven mad by the horrors they face and the carnage they inflict day after day, but sometimes the stress of being an adventurer can be too much to bear. If your campaign has a strong horror theme, you might want to use madness as a way to reinforce that theme, emphasizing the extraordinarily horrific nature of the threats the adventurers face. Going mad. Various magical effects can inflict madness on an otherwise stable mind. Certain spells such as Contact of the Plane and Symbol can cause insanity, and you can use the madness rules here instead of the spell effects in the player's handbook. Diseases, poisons and planar effects such as Psychic Wind or the Howling Winds of Pandemonium can all inflict madness. Some artifacts can also break the psyche of a character who uses or becomes attuned to them. Resisting a madness-inducing effect usually requires a wisdom or a charisma saving throw. If your game includes the sanity score, see Chapter 9 Dungeon Master's Workshop, a creature makes a sanity saving throw instead. Madness effects. Madness can be short-term, long-term, or indefinite. Most relatively mundane effects impose short-term madness, which lasts for just a few minutes. More horrific effects or cumulative effects can result in a long-term or indefinite madness. A character afflicted with a short-term madness is subjected to an effect from the short-term madness table for 1d10 minutes. A character afflicted with long-term madness is subjected to an effect from the long-term madness table for 1d10 times 10 hours. A character afflicted with indefinite madness gains a new character flaw from the indefinite madness table that lasts until cured. As much as I like madness as a theme in a fantasy setting, mad characters, mad NPCs like a mad mage or an insane old knight that lives as a hermit. These sort of insane characters are very interesting and I like them as a DM, but as a player I wouldn't want a randomly generated madness effect. For example, I wouldn't want my character to twitch all the time if I didn't conceive the character as the sort of person who's slightly mad, right? I get that you don't always get what you want as a player. You're not always supposed to have what you want. But players make the sort of characters that kind of are someone they'd like to be, or at the very, well, maybe if not someone they'd like to be, someone they'd like to roleplay, someone who they'd like to be for the period of the game. A person might not enjoy playing someone who's manic, paranoid, or experiences hallucinations, whatever. They want to portray such a character in a story. I think as a DM, if you were just to roll on a table and tell the person, okay, so for example, the character suffers extreme paranoia. The player might not enjoy acting like a paranoid guy, right? Especially if the character was a nice person, a good person, and trusted their comrades. Suddenly turning into a paranoid character, role-playing that is a big change. I'd be careful with madness. I'd rather not do it. Unless the player specifically wanted to have these sort of things in the campaign, then it's no holds barred. Short-term madness. Below 1d100 and on a 1 to 20, the character retreats into his or her mind and becomes paralyzed. The effect ends if the character takes any damage. 21 to 30, the character becomes incapacitated and spends the duration screaming, laughing, or weeping. 31 to 40, the character becomes frightened and must use his or her action and movement each round to flee from the source of fear. 41 to 50, the character begins babbling and is incapable of normal speech or spellcasting. 51 to 60, the character must use his or her action each round to attack the nearest creature. 61 to 70, the character experiences vivid hallucinations and has disadvantage on ability checks. 71 to 75, the character does whatever anyone tells him or her to do that isn't obviously self-destructive. 76 to 80, the character experiences an overpowering urge to eat something strange such as dirt, slime, or offal. 81 to 90, the character is stunned. 91 to 100, the character falls unconscious. Long-term madness. So the short-term madness are pretty mild. They don't seem to affect the personality. I guess these are mostly safe, these are mostly fine. Long-term madness, let's take a look. 1 to 10, the character feels compelled to repeat a specific activity over and over, such as washing hands, touching things, praying, or counting coins. 11 to 20, the character experiences vivid hallucinations and has disadvantage on ability checks. 21 to 30, the character suffers extreme paranoia. The character has disadvantage on wisdom and charisma checks. 31 to 40, the character regards something, usually the source of madness, with intense revulsion, as if affected by the antipathy effect of the antipathy-sympathy spell. 41 to 45, the character experiences a powerful delusion. Choose a potion, the character imagines that he or she is under its effects. That's pretty interesting, mechanics-wise, where you get to choose any potion from like a bunch of interesting magic potions, and the character thinks they're under the effect of it. The most natural, I think, for this is the potion of flight or levitation, that one, but I bet there's some other interesting potions. 46 to 55, the character becomes attached to a lucky charm such as a person or an object and has a disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws while more than 30 feet from it. 56 to 65, the character is blinded 25% or deafened 75%. 66 to 75, the character experiences uncontrollable tremors or tics, which impose disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws that involve strength or dexterity. 76 to 85, the character suffers from partial amnesia. The character knows who he or she is and retains racial traits and class features, but doesn't recognize other people or remember anything that happens before the madness took effect. 86 to 90, whenever the character takes damage, he or she must succeed on a DC 15 wisdom saving throw, or be affected as though he or she failed a saving throw against the confusion spell. The confusion effect lasts for 1 minute. 91 to 95, the character loses the ability to speak. 96 to 100, the character falls unconscious. No amount of jostling or damaging can wake the character. Curing madness. A calm emotion spell can suppress the effects of madness, while a lesser restoration spell can rid a character of a short-term or long-term madness. Depending on the source of the madness, remove curse or dispel evil might also prove effective. A greater restoration spell or more powerful magic is required to rid a character of indefinite madness. Experience points. Experience points, XP, fuel level advancement for player characters and are most often the reward for completing combat encounters. Each monster has an XP value based on its challenge rating. When adventurers defeat one or more monsters, typically by killing, routing or capturing them, they divide the total XP value of the monsters evenly among themselves. If the party received substantial assistance from one or more NPCs, count those NPCs as party members when dividing up the XP, because the NPCs made the fight easier. Individual characters receive fewer XP. Chapter 3, Creating Adventures, provides guidelines for designing combat encounters using experience points. Okay, actually we also have an indefinite madness table, so before coming back to experience, let's just jump in and read this very quickly. On a 1 to 15, you gain the flaw of being drunk keeps me sane. 16 to 25, you get the flaw I keep whatever I find. 26 to 30, I try to become more like someone else I know, adopting his or her style of dress, mannerisms, and name. 31 to 35, I must bend the truth, exaggerate, or outright lie to be interesting to other people. 36 to 45, achieving my goal is the only thing of interest to me and I'll ignore everything else to pursue it. 46 to 50, I find it hard to care about anything that goes on around me. 51, I think I gained that one, back to 46 to 50. 51 to 55, I don't like the way people judge me all the time. 56 to 70, I am the smartest, wisest, strongest, fastest, and most beautiful person I know. 71 to 80, I am convinced that powerful enemies are hunting me and that agents are everywhere I go. I am sure they're watching me all the time. 81 to 85, there's only one person I can trust, and only I can see this special friend. Oh, that's one a doozy. Not very realistic, but has a certain whimsical charm to it. 86 to 95, I can't take anything seriously. The more serious the situation, the funnier I find it. 96 to 100, I've discovered that I really like killing people. Don't clip that. Experience points. Experience points, XP, fuel level advancement for player characters and are most often the reward for completing combat encounters. Each monster has an XP value based on its challenge rating. When adventurers defeat one or more monsters, typically by killing, routing, or capturing them, they divide the total XP value of the monsters evenly among themselves. If the party received substantial assistance from one or more NPCs, count those NPCs as party members when dividing up the XP. Because the NPCs made the fight easier, individual characters receive fewer XP. Chapter 3, Creating Adventures, provides guidelines for designing combat encounters using experience points. Absent characters. Typically adventurers earn experience only for encounters they participate in. If a player is absent for a session, that player's character misses out on the experience points. Over time, you might end up with a level gap between the characters of players who never miss a session and characters belonging to players who are more sporadic in their attendance. Nothing is wrong with that. A gap of 2 or 3 levels between different characters in the same party isn't going to ruin the game for everyone. Some DMs treat EXP as a reward for participating in the game, and keeping up with the rest of the party is good incentive for players to attend as many sessions as possible. As an alternative, give absent characters the same XP that other characters earned each session, being the group at the same level. Few players will intentionally miss out on the fun of gaming just because they know they'll receive XP for it even if they don't show up. That's ridiculous. XP should never be an incentive to attend a game. You should want to be gaming. Game because you want to game, not because you want to get fictional points, non-existing points. Non-combat challenges. You decide whether to award experience to characters for overcoming challenges outside combat. If the adventurers complete a tense negotiation with the Baron, forge a trade agreement with a clan of surly dwarves, or successfully navigate the chasm of doom, you might decide they deserve an XP reward. As a starting point, use the rules for building combat encounters in Chapter 3 to gauge the difficulty of the challenge. Then award the characters XP as if it had been a combat encounter of the same difficulty, but only if the encounter involved a meaningful risk of failure. I guess no, because there's probably some things that I'd want to reward some experience for that don't necessarily carry a risk of failure, but are good experiences for the players, and they could teach them something. I feel like you don't need to limit yourself to awarding XP only if there was a significant risk of failure. If you want your game to ascend to higher levels of EXP faster, you can just be more generous with giving experience for these sort of achievements. For example, if the party is traveling to a faraway city in the Icewind Dale and they finally manage to reach that city, I wouldn't mind giving them some extra experience for it, even though there was no risk of them never finding the city. They'd eventually find it. There'd be like a risk that they'd get lost for a while and maybe find it later. I'd be willing to give them some XP for finding the destination. And you can come up with many examples like that. I guess you do. You can listen to me or you can listen to the book. Who's more important to you, me or the book? Milestones. You can also award XP when characters complete significant milestones. Okay, so you could treat that as a milestone in my example. When preparing your adventure, designate certain events or challenges as milestones, as with the following examples. Accomplishing one in a series of goals necessary to complete the adventure, discovering a hidden location or a piece of information relevant to the adventure, reaching an important destination. When awarding XP, treat a major milestone as a hard encounter and a minor milestone as an easy encounter. If you want to reward your players for the progress through an adventure with something more than XP and treasure, give them additional small rewards at milestone points. Here are some examples. The adventurers gain the benefit of a short rest. Characters can recover a hit die or a low-level spell slot. Characters can regain the use of magic items that have had their limited uses expanded. The last one doesn't seem to make sense narrative-wise, so I'd never do it. The recover a hit die or a low-level spell slot. I guess this one could work narratively because, well, it's hard to believe that suddenly the character's wounds closed and they have more hit points than they had because they reached a milestone. You can imagine it in a way where hit points are not necessarily or only an emanation of your bodily health. I think even the manual mentions somewhere that the maximum hit points of a character reflect many things, including physical toughness, but also the will to survive. So the recovered hit points in this example would be the character is motivated, his will to survive is rejuvenated, is renewed, they are pumped because they reached this milestone. And the same for spells. Your character can enter a higher state of mental focus and recall an extra spell, get an extra slot. It makes sense narratively. But the last one, well, you won't suddenly charge because you enter the city. That doesn't make much sense. Level advancement without XP. You can do away with experience points entirely and control the rate of characters' advancement. Advance characters based on how many sessions they play or when they accomplish significant story goals in campaign. In either case, you tell the players when their characters gain a level. This method of level advancement can be particularly helpful if your campaign doesn't include much combat, or includes so much combat that tracking XP becomes tiresome. I think that any amount of combat makes tracking XP tiresome. Tracking XP is never pleasurable, it's always tiresome. But at the same time, giving XP for different things and making it not necessarily even because different players do different things worth different amounts of XP during a game, and different games awarding different amounts of XP, that adds some interest to the whole leveling thing. And when you just say it's a level and it's a level because it kind of feels scripted, both of these systems have something going for them, I have to admit, and I'm not sure which one I'd go with, which one I'd find better, and which one I'll ultimately choose. If I have inexperienced players, I'd rather not have them track XP, right? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe in my longer campaign, I'd really like to do experience, but I'm not sure. Like, I might try it and then become disillusioned by it, by saying, oh, it's only tedium, it doesn't add what I expected it to add to the game, and just want to drop it. We'll see, we'll see. Session-based advancement. A good rate of session-based advancements is to have characters reach 2nd level after the first session of play, 3rd level after another session, and 4th level after 2 more sessions, then spend 2 or 3 sessions for each subsequent level. This rate mirrors the standard rate of advancement, assuming sessions are about 4 hours long. Story-based advancements. When you let the story of the campaign drive advancement, you award levels when adventurers accomplish significant goals in the campaign. With the level advancement without EXP, this one probably makes most sense. And also, the session-based advancement, you'd probably reach level 20 very quickly. 30 games and you're level 20. Well, no, 30 or 40. Well, 40 games is kind of okay, I guess, for a 1 to 20 long campaign. And we're done with the chapter. What's happening in this art? It's like a bunch of skeletons in a very springy, meadowy, color palette style of environment, fighting some, I don't know who, honestly. These look like dwarves, but are they all dwarves? Could be all dwarves. I don't know. I'm not sure what this depicts, but it's too specific to be just random. I'm fairly sure this is something in the D&D thing. With the chapter concluded, we ended the stream, still unsure what that last piece of art depicted. If you have any ideas, leave a comment. If you liked the video, consider leaving a like or checking me out on Twitch, link in the description. Thank you for watching, may you get all the experience. Have a great day. Bye.